Yeah, the Southern Kitchen Garden is still in print, and Amazon has it. The Growing Fruits and Nuts in the South is not in print anymore, but you can find it at eBay as a used book quite often, and places like that. It's actually, University of Mississippi used it as their university textbook for fruit culture for years until they couldn't get it anymore. And it's really probably one of the best, even though Bill and I wrote it, it's really one of the best books on growing fruits and nuts in the Southeast. Most everything is written for the Northeast, the West, not here. And it's different here. Y'all know that, right? So anyway, another couple of weird places, fun places to go if you're into crazy plants. Joshua's in the Heights, in Houston, is a fun place to go to. And there's a place down in South Houston called Ma's Garden. And it's not M-A-apostrophe-S, I think it's M-A-W-apostrophe-S, Ma's Garden. And they have lots of crazy plants.
Really?
Oh yeah, but that's a little bit of a trek, so.
In South Houston?
Yeah, it's, Pasadena, Nassau, down in that area there.
You don't know if they're open on the weekends, do you?
Oh yeah, I think, yeah, absolutely.
That's where I'm headed this weekend.
Yeah, find them on the internet, but it's Ma's Garden. They have lots of crazy plants, I do have, my email addresses are up here, thomasleroy53@gmail.com and gardening with Tom LeRoy @gmail.com. Happy to take questions. You got a really good agent here. Not all the counties do, and he actually likes gardening and gardeners. And you get into some of the counties, if it's not goats, beef, cattle, or cotton, they don't want to talk to you about it. And so y'all are fortunate. But if you want to send me any questions, I'm more than happy to take questions, absolutely. Pictures go really good with questions. In focus pictures are even better. So if you can make the pictures in focus, that really does help. Let me know where you're at. I don't need your home address, but it's helpful to know that you're in Leon County, near Centerville or whatever. I got an email from a lady asking about a plant and whether we could grow it. And I emailed her back and said, no, it really doesn't do very well here. And she said, I don't think you know what you're talking about because I see them all over Seattle. And it would have been helpful to me had I known she was in Seattle, because they do grow different stuff in Seattle than they grow here. We're going to talk about vegetable gardening, which is really one of my favorite pastimes. I've been vegetable gardening since I was in college. I don't know how I got to this place because neither of my parents were into gardening at all. I did most of the landscape and the planting and all that kind of stuff at the house when I was a kid. But I really like vegetable gardening. It's one of my favorite things. I still have I don't have really a good yard for vegetable gardening. I'm not fortunate like y'all to have lots of expansive open places, and I have lots of trees and stuff. So almost all of my vegetables are now in containers because I can put them where the sun is. And I've been container gardening for about 6 years, and I've had a lot of fun doing that. It's a lot of fun. And if you fertilize aggressively, you can actually grow pretty good vegetables in containers. How many of you do have a vegetable garden or have been vegetable gardening already? No? All of you? No? Maybe we can talk you into it. We'll see. Well, there's a lot of reasons that people do it. I think the number one that I hear is that homegrown vegetables taste better. And I'm not absolutely certain that that's true, but by God, by the time you spend all that time working, you feel like they taste better anyway. You have absolute control over what you put on your vegetables. If you want to hit them with DDT and chloridane, you can. I wouldn't recommend it, but you can. And if you don't want to use anything, or you only want to use organic products, then you can do that too. I find I do fertilize with commercial fertilizers. I do use organic fertilizers as well, but I don't spray. and I don't spray not because I'm afraid of pesticides, it's because I don't find it necessary. I think if you grow healthy vegetables and you follow good cultural practices, you really shouldn't have a lot of problems, and you shouldn't have to do a lot of spraying of pesticides. It's good exercise, get you out of the house, get you away from the tablet. It's a lot of fun. I'd encourage all of you to get kids involved in gardening, whether it be vegetable gardening or flower gardening or whatever. You all are in a rural area where maybe kids are a little bit better connected to the farm than in the cities, but we are way, way, way away from our agricultural roots when we get into the cities. And it's important that you make sure you pass that on to children. Most children think beef comes from a McDonald's and broccoli comes from a cafeteria or something. They just have no idea where all this stuff. I still am amazed. I go in a produce market and I see a head of broccoli for $1.79, and I think, how do they get it there that cheap? I mean, it's just amazing the produce, how cheap the produce is compared to what we can produce it for. And then I go to the garden center and they've got a 4-inch broccoli plant and it's for sale for $1.79. So I have a hard time buying a $1.79 broccoli plant when I can buy a head of broccoli in the grocery store for $1.79. So I buy the 6-packs that are cheaper. Put the garden in a good sunny place. Sunny, 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 sunny. More sun the better. This idea that if I put them in the shade, they'll be more comfortable in the summer, well, that may be true, but they will not produce better. They need sun to produce. 6 to 8 hours of sun minimum to really grow decent vegetables. 10 to 12 to really do a good job. So the more sun you can get, the better. Location's really important. How much space do you need? Are you gardening for you and a spouse? Are you gardening for you, a spouse, and your kid's family and your other kid's family? Are you gardening to take food to the church? Are you canning? Are you freezing? You have to look at all those things when you try to figure out how much garden you need. And then you also need to think about how much time do you need, because the bigger the garden, the bigger the time commitment is. And if you don't take care of it, the weeds are going to overtake it and you're going to be unhappy with the experience. So I suggest people who have never had a vegetable garden before start out rather small and then enlarge it as they find they have time and get experience and that sort of thing. So a 10 by 10 garden is a nice sized garden. A 5 by 10 garden is a nice sized garden for someone who's never done it before. So don't think you got to go out and put out a huge garden. Look into what your planting zones are, when your first freeze is, when your last freeze is, because these are important things when you start considering when to plant things. If you plant green beans in late October, the chances that it's going to get frozen before you pick green beans are pretty good. So you got to know when the first freeze is in the fall. For you all, I would say probably on an average sometime mid to late November, probably. Springtime, you're probably looking at the last freeze sometime in the middle or latter part of March. Does it happen after that? Yeah, it does sometimes, but I would say on average you're probably looking at the middle to latter part of March for that. So you need to know those things. Planting zones, you all are probably in 8B. Is that right? You all know? I think y'all are,
I think, yeah,
8B, is that right?
I think so.
Yeah. So that's helpful to know also. You want the ground to be fairly level. You don't want to plant at the foot of a hill where it's going to tend to collect water and hold water and that sort of thing. As I mentioned before, 6 to 8 hours of minimum of sunlight. Try to avoid planting in low spots or places where water sits. It creates all kinds of problems for you. And put it where you have water access to you, because regardless of how much rainfall you get and when you get the rainfall, you're going to have to water at times. You usually have to water to get seed to germinate. Summertime, certainly you're going to have to water. So plant it somewhere where you're close enough to water that you can get into the garden easily. Put it somewhere where you see it every day. You all already live in the country. But when I worked in Houston, we'd get lots of people who say, I just bought a place in Round Top, or I just bought a place in Kerrville. We're going to put in a big garden there. And my first question is, how often are you going to be there? Oh, maybe a couple times a month. You can't garden a couple times a month. You've got to be out there looking at things. I had a professor in college who used to say the best control of insects and diseases in your garden is your shadow. If you're not out there looking at things, you're not going to catch things when there's small problems, and then you're going to have big problems. So try to put it somewhere where you see it all the time. And try to stay away from big trees, large shrubs. They sap the nutrients, they sap the water. Drip line's not far enough, but if that's as far as you can get, just get as far away from them as you can. Tree roots are extremely expansive, and a lot of the researchers feel they go 2 to 3 times the height of the tree. So that means if you've got a 60-foot tall oak in your yard, they got roots 180 feet away from the tree. So are you going to be able to get away from them? Probably not, but try to get as far away from them as you possibly can. If you're planting a garden where you have Bermuda or Bahia, not so much with St. Augustine, but try to get rid of the Bermuda and the Bahia before you put the garden in. It will become a horrendous weed problem for you if you don't. So think about that. You can build a box garden over St. Augustine and put in, 2x8s or 2x10s. Lay down 10 layers of newspaper, put your soil in, put a garden in, and you're fine. But if you do that with Bermuda grass, the Bermuda grass will come through the newspaper, come through the soil, and you'll have a nice raised bed garden of Bermuda grass. So you got to get rid of the grass before you start the garden, however you plan to do that. Now here's a nice little backyard raised bed garden. Now, if you were invited to come out to this house and they said, well, give me some suggestions on what I might do differently, what kind of things might you key in on?
Does it get enough sun?
Does it get enough sun? Good question. You're certainly getting a lot of shade in this corner. You can see you've lost this bed. You're losing the other bed. So you might want to at least, very least, trim those climbing roses on the inside of the fence to allow more sunlight in there. What else might you
Too close
suggest?
together.
The beds? I think the beds are way too close together. Can't get a wheelbarrow in there if you wanted to bring mulch in or anything like that. It would even be hard to walk in there. You feel like you're walking in on a tightrope every time you go in there. The beds are also pretty deep. Those are almost 5-foot beds. So getting to the center of those beds would be hard. So I think I'd take at least 6 inches, maybe even a foot, off of each bed, make the walks a little wider, and make the beds a little narrower, and then you'd have better access into the bed. So those are the kinds of things that you need to think about when you're putting in a garden. This is a garden that has what we call wide bed planting. The beds are very, very wide. And one of the advantages of doing a system like this, if you're doing a regular hill and furrow plowed up garden, is that you can plant multiple rows on the top of each bed so you get better use of the soil. This one is also irrigated by drip irrigation, which is a really nice, efficient way of irrigating. It's higher maintenance. You got to check it periodically, go out there, turn it on, look for fountains, because you'll have the rats will come and chew on them, the rabbits will come and chew on the tubes, and then you'll have little fountains out there that you have to repair and that sort of thing. But drip irrigation is a really efficient way to get water to the garden. This is out at one of the community gardens in Conroe. It's run by the senior citizens through one of the community centers. And you have to be 55 or older to even have a garden out there. There's actually a waiting list to get in there. But look how tall those beds are. I mean, they have really built those beds up. Why would you think they would want those beds built so high?
Clay soil, not good soil.
Yeah, soil doesn't drain very well. You can see the water standing in the ditches. The main reason is to get out of the water, to get the beds up out of the water so that the plants don't have problems with too much water. Also, if you're a senior citizen, it might be nice to have tall beds because you'd have less bended over, which helps the back a little bit as well. Okay, here's a garden in somebody's backyard. If you were to critique it, what suggestions might you make on that garden?
against the sun. It's like, you have a
Huh?
wall against it, so,
It looks like it doesn't get enough air. I mean,
yeah. And it's really crowded. You can't, how can you figure out what plants,
Yeah.
what plant?
You need to have access into it somewhere. I think that you need to have things spaced out a little better so you have better access. I don't like ever putting anything up against a foundation, so I would probably pull the bed a foot or 18 inches off the foundation, because termites are a huge problem in the South, and they can make easy access into the house through mud tunnels, and if you can't see the foundation, it's hard to tell where those are. So maybe make some access points, space things out a little better, get off that wall a little bit. Anybody know what these are? Those are Bradford pears.
oh
Oh,
wow.
that's not gonna work.
That was a real bad idea, wasn't it? Yeah, Bradford pears have no business being planted by you. They're cute right now when they're little, but it won't be long they're going to be big, and when they are, then the garden's gone. It's history. So you don't plant trees in a garden. You can plant a garden if you put in an orchard. You can plant a garden in an orchard with the idea that when the orchard starts to mature, the garden goes away. But you can't plant an orchard in a garden, because the fruit trees are ultimately going to shade everything out. This is the way that a lot of people are going with gardens now, is raised bed or box gardens, and I think it's a really good technique, especially where you have poor soils. You all are fortunate in that a lot of you probably have a light sandy loam soil, and if you do, just thank your lucky stars, because there's nothing better for vegetable gardening than sandy soils. You'll cuss the sandy soils in the summertime when it's dry, but you'll love the sandy soils in the wintertime when it's wet. And you can always add lots of organic matter to make your sands hold water better. But you can't get rid of the water if you have a heavy clay soil and it's wet. So sands are better, but where you have really poor soils, or where you don't have a good location for an in-ground garden, box gardens can be great. What you build the box gardens out of is sort of up to you. You can use landscape timbers, old railroad ties, not new railroad ties, cinder blocks, stacking stones, all kinds of different things can be used. Used to be we suggested you not use treated lumber, the wood penetrated lumber. They used to use arsenate products in the treated lumber, and chromium, which is a heavy metal. Now they're all copper-based treatments that they use in the lumber, and EPA and other groups have determined that it's perfectly safe to use around edibles. So since about the 90s, all they've been using in treated lumber is copper-based products. So if you want to use treated lumber, I feel confident telling you it's perfectly safe to do that. Now, if you are concerned about the penetrant that's used in the treated lumber, then just use something else. You have lots of other choices that you can use. So you don't have to use the treated lumber if you don't want to. You can use crushed concrete in the walks. You can just have a turf area that you mow. You can have pretty pavers. Pretty much whatever you want between the boxes. Use compost or whatever. A lot of people put in a dedicated herb garden, a place where they can grow herbs, but many of the herbs fit beautifully into a vegetable garden. So don't feel like you got to have a spot just for the herbs. The other thing that I would suggest to you is that some of the perennial herbs fit beautifully into the landscape. And I don't have them right now, but I've had oregano in the flower beds as a nice little evergreen bush. And I've used rosemary. Rosemary makes a wonderful hedge. And, rosemary will get up here in our area. It's not a little plant for us. Things will get 5 feet tall. So some of the perennial herbs can be used in the landscape as landscape shrubs or plants. And then the annual herbs, you can actually mix them into your vegetable garden. They fit beautifully into a vegetable garden. So you don't need this dedicated bed that's your herb garden. You can mix them in with other stuff. I really like container gardening. I've had a lot of fun doing it. I will tell you that it does require more care. In the summertime, you're watering every single day. And I don't care how faithful your grandchild is, they will not keep up with it when you're out of town. So if we go out of town for the summer, we pretty much just abandon the vegetable garden. Bigger the pots, the better. People tend to go with containers that are too small. Can you grow tomatoes upside down? You absolutely can. I will tell you that it's really hard to get good production on that topsy-turvy tomato thing. Certainly you don't get the kind of production they show in the commercial, you know, where the whole plant is covered with ripe tomatoes. It just doesn't happen that way. But you certainly can. Fertilize aggressively. I try to fertilize every 4 to 6 weeks with a good slow-release fertilizer. And then when I think about it, I'll put some Miracle Grow or some other liquid fertilizer on. You just got to keep them moving if they're in containers more aggressively than if they're in the ground. I just use a commercial potting soil to buy at the garden center, or actually Sam's in the spring. I usually load up at Sam's in the spring when they have their, you know, they get that seasonal stuff in the spring, and I'll load up with several bags of potting soil that I keep in the garage until I need it. Not all of us have unlimited space. We just have to kind of control some of the bigger plants, things like cucumbers and cantaloupe and watermelon and things that get really big. So you can use trellises for that. These are pole beans being grown on a trellis. They do wonderfully. Gets them up out of the way, makes it easy to pick. So wherever you can, you may want to consider trellises for the big viney stuff. Remember that with vegetables, because of the disease problems, you've got to move them around. So you don't want to grow tomatoes in the same place, in the same bed for 5 or 6, 7 years. You want to move it around. And the same thing's true of the other vegetables that you grow. So make your fences, your trellises, so they're mobile, so you can move them. This is a welded wire fence, and it's hooked to T-posts, you know, the metal T-posts. And you can drive the T-posts into the ground, and then you go to Tractor Supply, and they make these metal clips that will just clip the wire fence onto the T-post, and then you just go unclip it, roll up the wire, put it in the garage till you need it the next time, and you're ready to set your fence up again. These on these frames actually have legs to them, have a bottom with legs to them, and they can be picked up and moved around. It's a two-man job, but they certainly can be moved if you want to move them. Have y'all had your soils class yet? Okay, so y'all know everything about this, I didn't. Well, you know NPK, right? Nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium. The bags of fertilizer always have 3 numbers on them, and they stand for nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. How many of you try to be organic? How many of you don't care? Okay, it's just right down the middle. Split right down the middle. The reason that I have this up here is to help out our organic gardeners. One of the problems that I've noticed in the organic gardening field is there are lots and lots and lots of companies that are doing everything they can to separate you from as much of your money as they possibly can. And fertilizers is one of the ways that they do that. Organic fertilizers are notoriously low in these numbers. So when you're going in to purchase a fertilizer, it's really important for you to look at it and think about the numbers when you purchase it. And so if you've got 2 bags of organic fertilizer there, and one of them is a 121, and the other one is a 735, and they're about the same price, which is your better deal?
735.
The one that has the higher numbers. So try to select products that have, for the dollar, have the highest numbers you can get. One of the products out there that I like is a product called MicroLife. MicroLife's actually manufactured in the Houston area. It's an organic fertilizer, and it tends to be rather high. The numbers tend to be rather high. I like cottonseed meal. You should be able to go to any of the feed stores in Leon County and buy a 50-pound sack of cottonseed meal. Cottonseed meal is about 11% nitrogen. It's hard to find any organic fertilizer that has 11% nitrogen in it. That's just hard to find. I use cottonseed meal on the azaleas. I use it in the flower beds. I use it in the garden. I think cottonseed meal is an excellent way to go where you're trying to be organic or if you're not trying to be organic, either
How do you
way.
apply it?
Huh?
I bought some and I blew it. I applied it wrong. And and it seems like, how can you apply this wrong, right?
That's what I'm wondering. What did you do to apply it wrong?
Apparently I put too much in one area and it just rotted my tomato plants.
Well, yeah,
Okay.
but I mean, you had to really put a lot
I had to
do
put a lot.
that. Yeah.
I mean, like, how are you putting it on?
Yeah, I go out there like chicken feed. I just scatter it like chicken
Okay.
feed. Now, if I'm doing it in the pots, I'll put it in. I'll mix it into the soil when I mix up the pots. When I get the pots ready to plant plants. But yeah, it's 11% nitrogen, and it could cause problems if you put way too much in.
I did. And how often do you put it on?
It lasts about 4 to 6 weeks.
4 to 6 weeks.
About every 4 to 6 weeks, you can broadcast some more out there.
Okay, thank you. Sorry about that. I can't believe I blew that. It's like,
This is my ex-son-in-law, and this was our shared garden up until the divorce. And this is the bed. This is the box garden that we built, and it's 2x8s. The soil around the garden is sandy, so we didn't worry about drainage. We didn't have to go real tall with the bed. We filled the bed with bank sand, which is a sandy loam soil. It's cheap. It's readily available, and you know what it is. It's bank sand. You order topsoil, and you know what you get? You get anything they want to sell you. Because topsoil doesn't mean a thing. They could go scrape the top 3 inches off of an asphalt parking lot and sell it to you as topsoil. Because all that topsoil is it's the soil on the top. There are no definitions for what topsoil is. So I buy bank sand for the vegetable garden, and then I buy the best organic matter I can get and mix about 30 to 40% organic matter with about 60 to 70% bank sand. And that's how I make the garden soil that I use for my vegetable gardens. This is a 50-pound sack of cottonseed meal, and the garden is 450 square feet, so we put in 50 pounds of cottonseed meal. This is Kyle. Kyle's 22, and this is Paul now. But he used to be, before girls came into his life, he helped me in the garden a lot. After girls showed up, that's it, it was done. We put in 20 pounds of triple 13. We knew we didn't have much nutrients in there to begin with, so we used a balanced fertilizer, 13-13-13. That's a granular commercial fertilizer. And then we also put in 20 pounds of agricultural lime. Lime is something that you guys probably will want to add as well, but it's best that you do that based on your soil tests. So I know the soil guy talked to you about getting a soil test. It's really worth the $10 you spend to get a soil test run to find out about calcium, how much lime you need to add. Because you all are still in the acid soils of Texas. It's not like Austin or Central Texas where they have lots and lots of limestone in the soil. So you're probably going to need the lime. So that's what we put in here, and we ran a tiller through it, mixed it up really good, raked it out, and that's how we started our garden. So bank sand, really good compost, 50 pounds of cottonseed meal per 400 square feet, 20 pounds of triple 13, and 20 pounds of agricultural lime is what we started with. And the first year garden is never going to be your best garden, but we did pretty good. We did pretty well on that, with that. One of the terms that we use quite often when we talk about vegetable gardening is side dressing. And it's important that you side dress these vegetables, especially the ones that take longer to produce. You fertilize when you put the garden in, and then the vegetables start growing and they begin to mature. And if they take more than about 6 or 8 weeks to grow, you need to come back in and supplement them again because they are going to have used up what you put in initially. And so that's where side dressing comes in. So if you're growing radishes or you're growing some of the faster stuff, mustard, things like that, probably what you put in at the beginning is going to be adequate. But tomatoes and peppers and green beans and squash and pumpkins and things like that, you're going to need to come in and side dress because they take too long to produce and you're going to use up what nutrients you have there in the soil. Now you look at this picture and you go, wow, we're putting down lots of fertilizer. That's just so you can tell what they're doing in the graphic. We're talking about with something like a 21% nitrogen using a half a cup per 10 foot of row. So go get you a half a cup, measuring cup in the house and put a half a cup of cornmeal in it. And go out there and measure 10 feet and start at one end sprinkling the cornmeal on and see when you run out.
Yeah.
Most people will run out way before they get to the end of the 10 feet. So it's not very much that you're putting down. I mean, half a cup per 10 foot a row, and that's on a 21% nitrogen. If you were using cottonseed meal, you could use twice that because it's only 11% nitrogen. So you could put in a full cup of cottonseed meal in a 10 foot a row, which still is not very much fertilizer. So we're not talking about doing a ton of fertilizer when we do this. And I've seen lots of people burn their plants by putting too much down when they do it. So you have to be careful about that. I love liquid fertilizers. You can buy all kinds of products at the garden centers. You can buy fish emulsion, Ocean Harvest. Actually made down in Madisonville, you can get a product called Has to Grow made by Medina. I'm not a big Medina fan, but they have a product called Has to Grow, which is pretty good. It's a fertilizer. I use Miracle Grow, the granular, the blue granules, and you mix it up, put it in one of these jugs, go out there and just spritz it around, water your vegetables with it. Liquid fertilizers can really help perk things up, make things do better, that sort of thing. So I think it's a good idea to, every 3-4 weeks to go out and spritz everything down. And then when you get done and there's still some left in your jug, go out and hit the flowers in the flower beds and maybe hit your azaleas and hit some of the other stuff in the yard. All of the plants you grow will benefit from a liquid fertilizer. Try to avoid liquid fertilizers when we get into July and August because you can burn them with liquid fertilizers when it's really hot and miserable.
Do we not fertilize? It's getting to be winter. Are you fertilizing still?
Well, if you're growing things that you want to get to go to sleep, then I wouldn't be fertilizing them. But certainly with the winter vegetables that we'll be talking about here later, you got to continue fertilizing. Strawberries grow through the winter months. You want to be fertilizing them. So anything that's growing through the winter months,
Okay.
you got to continue to fertilize them. But there's a lot of stuff that you really want to go to sleep, and so that stuff. Like I won't fertilize my peaches at the house anymore. I won't fertilize my figs or my blackberries. I want them to go to bed. But when I get the broccoli and the cauliflower and the lettuce and spinach and stuff planted, I'm going to be fertilizing them pretty aggressively. This is a Siphon-X. This is a deal you attach to the garden, to the hose bib, and then you attach your garden hose to it. And then you turn the water on and it sucks the fertilizer out of the stock container. It goes into the hose and comes out the end of the hose. Now, you need to mark that hose so that you don't use it to drink water out of. I know nowadays people freak out when they see you out in the yard drinking water out of a garden hose, but I've always drank water out of a garden hose. So, I'm not going to stop now. This is what the Siphon-X looks like. It's just a little tube that goes to a brass fitting. And as the water goes through the brass fitting, it sucks the fertilizer up through the little tube. Here's one of the organic liquid fertilizers out there called BioGrow. And here's Miracle Grow. This is the stuff I use. As I said, I'm not organic, but if you're organic, you can use Ocean Harvest, kelp spray, fish emulsion. You have a lot of choices as far as liquid fertilizers are concerned. You really need to learn how to grow vegetables from seed. It's become obvious to me over the last 10 or 15 years that people no longer know how to plant vegetable seed and grow plants from seed. Because you go to the garden centers and you see the craziest things being sold as plants, as transplants. Corn. I saw turnips being sold as transplants. Now that's a root crop. The root goes down, hits the bottom of the pot. Now you've got a J-rooted turnip plant. You don't have a nice big round turnip. So some of this stuff green beans. Shouldn't plant green beans from transplants. So you got to learn how to grow plants from seed if you're going to really become a good vegetable gardener. And the first thing is good soil preparation. You don't need to use string lines. You don't have to have rows that are perfectly straight, but you do want to break the soil up so that when you plant the seed, you've got good seed to soil contact. You want to have good seed to soil contact. This is my vegetable garden, and this is what I take the hoe and I flip the hoe over and drag the handle through the soil and cut a little shallow trench. Those are bean seed. I use bean seed because they're big enough that you could see them in the picture. If I was planting lettuce seed, you'd never see them. And I plant the seed, then I lightly rake the soil over them, and then I water. Tomorrow I water, next day I water. I'll water until the seeds begin to germinate. And you should be able to get a stand up pretty easily that way. The depth that you cover the seed is linked to how big the seed is. The bigger the seed, the deeper you can plant them. The finer the seed is, the closer to the surface you plant them. So things like turnips, turnip seed are little bitty. Plant them right on the surface. Don't cover them. Lettuce and carrots both need light to germinate. If you cover them with soil, you'll never see them because they won't come up. So small seed, plant close to the surface. Big seed, you can plant a ½ inch to 1 inch deep. So carrots and pumpkins and green beans and things like that, you can plant those seed an inch or so deep. But the little bitty seed, plant it right on the surface. Now, one of the things that we find in a lot of the rural communities is that people have big gardens. And I know when we've talked to groups here before, it's not uncommon for somebody to have a 1 or 2 acre garden. This little push planter can be really a valuable tool if you have a big garden. It costs about $100, $150, which may sound like a lot. It's got a wheel on the side that you change out according to what seed you're planting, and the wheel turns as you push it, and has little notches cut in the side of the wheel. It picks up the seed and then drops them into a little tube that goes down. And then there's a shoe that cuts a trench, and you can adjust the depth of the trench. And then it's got a little chain that drags soil over the trench, and then a wheel in the back that packs the soil. It's essentially a single row planter, just like a planter a farmer would use. And you can walk down the row and plant a 250-foot row in a matter of seconds, whereas if you did it with a hoe and a bending over, dropping seed, it would take you a really long time and be a lot harder on your back. So if you got a really big garden, this is something that I think is worth looking into.
Where do you get them?
I've seen them at Parks Seed Company, Johnny's Seed Company.
So they're mail order?
You can certainly can mail order. I bet they sell everything on Amazon. I'm sure they sell them on Amazon.
Parks Seed Company, where would you find that? Isn't that mail order? No.
Actually, if you get my seed list over there, Parks is on there. And they do have a mail. They will send you a catalog, but they also have a really nice website. So you can go to Google and type in Parks Seed Company, and they'll take you to the website. Johnny's Select Seed has a nice website that you can get to also. So there's one of those that has seed sources on it. Some of the seed sources that are on there don't have the web addresses, because when I put that together, they were just starting to get really aggressive about setting up websites. And but if you type the name of the seed company in, you can get to it pretty easily. And I order seed from online as well, because with some things I'm very particular about varieties, and I can go to the garden centers and the feed stores and get packet seed of a lot of stuff, because variety is not that critical to me. But some things, in order for you to be successful, you got to have the right variety, and sometimes you can't find the right variety locally, which means you have to order it from a seed company. And as far as which seed company you use the seed company that has the variety that you're looking for. It doesn't matter whether the seed company's in Buffalo, New York, or in Pensacola, Florida. It doesn't matter where they are, because none of them grow their own seed anyway. They all buy seed from seed breeders and then put them in little packets and send them to you. So it's the variety that you're looking for. This guy's using a nice straight edge to plant his beans. You don't have to use a straight edge, but if you want to use a straight edge, you can use a straight edge. If you wanted to use a yardstick and measure the distance between them, you can certainly do that. I tend to plant seed close together, and then I'll come in with a hoe and chop out the ones that I don't need. I find it easier because by the time I get done planting, if I don't get a stand, I usually don't get back out there to replant to fill in those gaps. So I like to plant heavy, and then I can always thin out the ones that are too close. Those little bitty seed, the real fine seed, you can just broadcast right on the surface. One of the things I invested in was you go to the little Italian restaurants or pizza restaurants, they've got the little shakers that they use for the pepper, red pepper, or for the Parmesan. I bought several of those, and you can take a little cornmeal, put it in there, and then pour your packet of seed in there and kind of shake it up a little bit. Then when you're broadcasting your seed, you just go out there and sprinkle it, and it spreads it real nice and even. Whereas if you take the packet of seed and just go out there and sprinkle it, you're going to end up with big glops and patches where it is. Things like mustard broadcast beautifully, collards, turnips they've got to be thinned pretty heavily. So a lot of the really small seeded stuff you can just broadcast the seed. So you prepare the soil, and you see how we've used the rake. It kind of has little ruts in it. You don't cover those. You just come in and water, and there's enough soil will wash in around the seed that you'll get them covered enough, because a lot of these little seed need light to germinate. So you don't want to get them covered too deeply. Once the seed come up, then you end up with a lot more plants than you need. So what I usually do, especially with the leafy greens, is I'll let them get big enough that I can use them, and then I'll start pulling entire plants. So this is arugula. Come in and pull the entire plant up, use it to cook with or to make a salad, and that'll provide space for the ones around it. And continue doing that until the plants are all spaced out. And then once they're all spaced out, then I can start harvesting individual leaves and leave the plants in place as long as I possibly can. I think this next, now this is carrots. You can see the carrots are way too close together. Now if you leave these like this, spaced like this, you'll end up with a whole bunch of carrots that are the diameter of a pencil. They'll never size up. They've got to have about 1.5 inches apart. They've got to be about 1.5 inches apart for them to develop the carrot. So as soon as you can get in there and begin to handle them, you've got to go in there and start pulling plants up. And that's hard for gardeners to do. Gardeners hate to pull up and throw out plants. But if you don't do it, carrots don't transplant well, so they're not going to move well. So, but if you don't do it, you won't get the carrots that you want. So get in there and thin them out, 1.5 inches or so between each plant. The same thing's true of radishes. Turnips, you've got to thin them out to 3 to 4 inches apart. Now turnips, because so many people eat the greens, you can thin them, and at the time that you're thinning them, eat the tops while you're waiting for them to develop the turnip root. Now this is lettuce, and it's too close together. Lettuce does transplant real easily. So you could actually go in here with a little transplanting tool and dig the plants up and move them to another spot in the garden. Even plant multiple rows. You take them and pull them out this way, so that you would have a big block of lettuce instead of this one lone single row. But lettuce transplants real easily. Here's mustard. And with mustard, we just thin those plants out until we get them on about 6 to 8 inch centers. And once they're spaced out about 6 to 8 inches apart, we start just harvesting individual leaves to come in and cook with. One of the things that I like to do, when you go to the garden center and you buy a plant, one of the things you're going to notice is the plants a lot of times are real tender, they've been protected. So I usually will bring them home, put them out near the garden, and let them have exposure to the sunlight and the wind and all that kind of stuff. So we call that hardening off. And I'll do that for 2 or 3 days, a week, before I actually put them in the ground. This is a small commercial farm, and they're hardening off the plants before they go out to the field with them. This is in someone's backyard, and they've got them out under a crepe myrtle tree in the backyard after they purchased them, and they'll leave them there. You know, buy them on a Tuesday or a Wednesday, and you're probably ready to plant by the weekend. Just want to get them exposed to the wind and the elements before you go out with them. I like to put a little fertilizer under my transplants when I do transplants. This is a small commercial farm. They're planting broccoli, and those are little broccoli plants that they're putting in. And he's sprinkling a little bit of slow release fertilizer under each plant as he plants them. Now you look at those and you go, broccoli, those are awfully close together. Well, broccoli is one of those that head size is determined by spacing. If you put them 18 inches apart, you're going to have great big heads if you take care of them properly. You put them 6 inches apart, you're going to have little bitty heads. So the farmer can manipulate the plants to do what they want to do. This particular farm, they want to bundle 3 small heads together and sell them that way. So they got the plants planted 6 inches apart. They're real close together. At my house, I would put them further apart because I want bigger individual heads than that. So you can use spacing on broccoli to determine head size. But put a little fertilizer underneath the plant, kind of swish it around a little bit, put the plant in, tap it on the head, and then be sure when you get done that you water everything really, really well. I don't care if the ground is really wet or not. When you plant transplants, you need to water, at least to wash the soil in around the plants and get rid of air pockets and things like that. So you always want to water after you transplant. Now we don't do a lot of this in our area because we just don't have a lot of winter a lot of years. But this is a little mini wind tunnel, and it's a polyethylene plastic over wire hoops. And actually this is up north, but down here they would actually have little slits cut in the sides because it gets too warm here, and you'll cook the plants with a covering like this. They actually have slits cut. The slits are not big enough that they're going to lose a lot of heat at night, but they will let it ventilate when the sun's out. But you can do that for winter protection. If you're Martha, you know Martha? Martha Stewart, you don't know Martha Stewart? If you're Martha, you have some of these. These are called cloches, and they're French, and they run, if you can find them, the real glass bell jars, they can run several $100s a piece. So most of us don't have the resources that Martha has, and so we go with Texas cloches, and they work just as well, and they're usually pretty much free. One of the things I like about using jugs like this is that when it gets really cold, you can actually put the cap on it, which will keep it from ventilating, and then in the morning take the cap off so that it can ventilate if it gets too hot. We don't even have to do a whole lot of this, but if you have something that's sensitive to cold, you may find that you have to cover it with something. I've used 5-gallon buckets, 30-gallon nursery pots for big tomato plants if I've got them in too early and we're going to get a late spring freeze. So covering does help. Y'all have any of these? I took that picture, was invited to go on a doe hunt on this ranch, and I don't think I got a doe because all I saw was deer like this. This guy's only 3 years old. He's a real youngster. That one would not be able, they would not be allow that one to be taken at this particular ranch. This one they would allow you to take. Can you see that? It's got that little 6-point, little bitty. So that's a shooter. And this one you want to wait until he's 6 or 7 years old when his rack is like this. But they all eat the same. They, and as far as your garden's concerned, they all eat your garden the same. So deer are tough. Deer are really hard. High fences is the only sure way I know. I have known gardeners who have used electric fences. If you live in a community where you have a lot of people around and you use an electric fence, I will tell you, be sure there's lots of signage. We're in a litigious society nowadays, and somebody walks over and gets a little shock on your electric fence, you'll be getting a phone call from their attorney. But electric fences can work. Scents, smells, can work, but they have to be reapplied all the time. So if you're going to use a spray of some sort, a deer repellent of some sort, you have to put it out about every 3 days, and it gets to be a problem. So in my opinion, if you have a serious problem, deer fences are probably the best approach. Just bite the bullet and do it. And
How
that's,
about dogs?
my dogs sleep when the deer come around. And so they're not a real good thing. But if you got real aggressive dogs, you might find that will work for you. Yeah. So it's certainly worth a try. And then squirrels and other varmints can be a big problem as well. When I moved to Houston, I had a lady call me, was very upset because she had just sold her house in the Memorial area, and was moving to Kingwood, which at that time was out in the country. And she called me and she said, I had tons of squirrels in Memorial, and now I'm in Kingwood and there aren't any squirrels. She was so upset she didn't have any squirrels. I said, put out a feeder. Put out a bird feeder. You'll have squirrels in a week. Squirrels are going to find you. You're never going to get rid of squirrels. Best control I've found for squirrels is a 13 to 15-year-old teenage boy and a nice high-powered pellet gun. That's the best control I've had at the house, is with teenage boys popping those squirrels. When I was first moved here, I used to go squirrel hunt he was the psychiatrist in Conroe. He was at that time he was the only psychiatrist in Conroe. And I will tell you, the craziest people you will ever meet are psychiatrists. Oh God, that guy was nuts. But anyway, I used to go squirrel hunting with him. But nobody hunts for squirrel anymore, but trapping squirrels is something that people will do to get them out of your garden. You can also trap raccoons. It's illegal in Texas to release varmints into other places. If you trap varmints, you've got to destroy them. You've got to kill them. The reason is because they carry diseases, and you can get a permit through Parks and Wildlife to release, but you have to release them in designated areas, I guess, where they need more raccoons. You can't just take them wherever you want to dump them. I tell people, we used to loan traps out at the extension office in Conroe. I think they still do. And I used to tell them that I know you're not going to kill them, because I just know people are not going to do that. So take them to the other side of the interstate. So if you live on the west side of 45, take them to the east side of 45 and let them loose. Because as they're trying to find their way back to your house, which they're going to have to dodge their way across Interstate 45 before they get to your house again. And maybe they'll get hit and killed doing that. But trapping is probably the best approach with these. They can climb over any fence, they can get through anything, any barrier you put up. There's lots of things you can do to be more successful as a gardener. Texas is not the best place on the planet to be a vegetable gardener. We've got lots of diseases, we've got lots of insects. But go with the varieties that do best in your area. I'm sure you can get a variety list for Leon County. You got my list from Montgomery County, which will work here as well. Plant things at the right time. The planting chart that you've got is for Montgomery County, and you're going to find that it's just a hair early. It's about a week early on planting time. So, if it says plant tomatoes March 1st, you probably want to wait till the 15th to plant them. So just delay the spring planting a little bit, and you want to maybe plant a week or two earlier in the fall for some of the things, especially the warm season stuff, in order to get them in before you guys get a freeze, because it does freeze here earlier than it does in Conroe. Good soil preparation, good fertility. Vegetables are heavy feeders. You need to be aware of that and be rather aggressive about fertilizing. When you fertilize, you don't put a ton on, but you just fertilize frequently, every 4 to 6 weeks. Try to keep the weeds, diseases, and insects under control. Make sure plants have adequate moisture, but the beds are in locations where they don't stay too wet. And then you've gone to all this trouble to grow all this stuff. Don't let the zucchini squash get this big before you pick them. Pick the stuff at the right time. And even time of day has an effect on produce's quality. If you can pick early in the day and get the produce in and cooled off as quickly as possible, it will store better and it will have better vitamins, better nutrients. It'll just be better quality. So if you harvest at 3 or 4 in the afternoon, it's not going to be as good as if you harvest at 8 or 9 o'clock in the morning. A lot of the commercial farms in the valley, they harvest at night because, you know, midsummer, it's pretty darn hot. The workers like it better. They get nothing to put lights out in the field, and they can harvest at night. The produce is in better shape and holds up better. A lot of you may not be familiar with floating row cover. Floating row cover is basically baby diaper liner. You know that liner on the inside of disposable baby diapers? And it's just a thin spun polyester material. Gives you about 2 to 4 degrees of frost protection. It will help protect the vegetables from the wind. We found on tomatoes, if we cover the cages with row cover, we can increase production as much as 30%. Same fertility, same variety, same everything. All we did is cover the cages with row cover, and it's because of the wind. In the early spring, we get lots of drying wind that prevents the plants from reaching their ultimate potential. Keeps insects off. If you put the row cover on after you already have the insects, it keeps the insects in, so you got to be aware of that too. It only gives you about, it allows about 85 to 90% of the light to penetrate, so it doesn't shade things too much. In this case, on squash, we actually plant the seeds of the squash, we cover the bed with row cover, and we let the squash plants grow. In the early spring, we have a lot of trouble with an insect called a thrips, and some people call them no-see-ums. And they transmit viruses to squash. And so by keeping the thrips off until the plants start to flower, when they start to bloom, you can see the yellow flowers starting to show up. You have to take the row cover off because you need the bees in there to pollinate the squash. So you just take the row cover. By then, the thrips are gone. They've moved on. And you can avoid getting viruses on your squash. So row cover does a good job of helping to keep insects out, and there are things you can do with that. Okay, let's see, how long do we go?
12:30, 1 o'clock, however long you want.
Okay. Did y'all bring your cots? Okay, do you need a break now, or do you want to keep going and we'll take a break in a little while? Keep going. Okay, I'm with you. The way I've got this thing set up, there's about 13 major vegetable families. There's about 70 or 80 vegetables that we commonly grow. Rather than us going into detail on every single vegetable, I've got this thing divided up into family groups. So we're going to talk about, the tomato family. And then we're going to talk about the cabbage family. We're going to talk about things in family groups. Because the way you treat the vegetables within the group are very similar. The other thing is if you're rotating things around the garden, you don't want to grow tomatoes in the same place for a long, long time because of the disease problems. Well, it has relatives, and all the relatives have to be kept away too. So tomatoes, well, I'll show you here. Tomatoes, peppers, eggplant, potatoes, and tomatillos are all in the same family. So if you've got a bed where you've been growing potatoes for the last 3 years, and you're going to move them somewhere else, and you plant that bed in tomatoes, have you rotated?
No.
You have not rotated. So you got to think about that. I really feel like about half of most people's gardens, maybe even a little more than half of most people's gardens, is made up of this family. So you have to think about how you're going to move things around. If you want to keep the tomatoes, peppers, eggplant, and potatoes out of a place where you've grown them for the last 2 or 3 years, for a few years, you're going to have to think about where you put them so that you can do that. So rotating crops is the reason we're in family groups, is because we want to try to rotate things as much as we can. Now, for those of you that have a 5 by 10 garden, you can't rotate anything. So what you do is you want to practice what they call clean culture, and that means when you go into the garden, you pull as much of the plant material out of there as you can. You keep diseased and rotten fruit up off the ground. You just try to be as clean as you possibly can so that diseases are less likely to build up in the soil. And then when you pull the plants, try to get as much of the root mass out of there as you possibly can so the disease doesn't continue to build up in the soil. So, but anyway, the first family we're going to talk about is the tomato family, which includes tomatoes, peppers, eggplant, potatoes, and tomatillos. We're going to talk about tomatoes first. Probably spend more time on tomatoes than any other single vegetable. But tomatoes are a fruit set is affected by temperature. So one of the problems that we run into in the South is that when the temperatures exceed a certain temperature, the tomatoes, the large fruited varieties of tomatoes, just stop producing. They won't produce anymore. Small fruited ones generally will continue to produce. If the temperatures are too low at night, and night temperature is what we're thinking about, if the temperatures are too low at night, then they won't set fruit because there's not time for the pollen to reach the ovaries and fertilize the eggs inside the ovaries, inside the fruit. Tomato flowers hang upside down, like this. When the wind blows, they get shaken. The shaking dislodges the pollen. The pollen falls, is on the inside of this cone. This cone is the male reproductive part, and on the inside of this cone is where the pollen is. The pollen is dislodged when the flower moves. It falls down, it lands on the stigma right down there, and that's how it's fertilized. Now, if the temperatures are too cool at night, below 50 degrees, it takes too long for the pollen cells to reach the ovary and fertilize the eggs, which become the seed. So if the nights are too cool and you have flowers on the plants, the flowers will fall off before they get fertilized. And they make a product they call bloom set. Basically, it's a plant growth hormone that you can spray the flower clusters with. It will make them hang on the plant longer, so allowing time for the pollen cells to reach the ovaries, the eggs, the ovules, and the fruit will develop normally. The problem, and I tell people about this because it's important to understand how tomatoes work, but if you, in our area, by the time spring gets here and we start planting tomatoes, our night temperatures are already into the 50s. If you were in Minneapolis or in Chicago or somewhere somewhere up in the north central U.S., and you planted tomatoes, your night temperatures would still be very cold, so it's a big problem for them. So you may have friends that live somewhere else that say, I plant my tomatoes in the spring and the flowers just drop off. Why? Well, that way you'll know to say, well, it's probably because your nights are too cool right now, and once it warms up, they'll start setting normally. But if you want to spray them with bloom set will make them hang on longer, so you might get some tomatoes out of them. Now, as we move into the summer, this is the one we have trouble with. When your night temperatures get into the mid to upper 70s, and they got up there really early this year, and they stayed up there up until just, last week, you'll get no fruit set. And the reason is because pollen shed doesn't occur on large fruited tomatoes when the night temperatures are above mid to upper 70s. So when we get really, really warm in the summer, the large fruited varieties of tomatoes will stop producing. That's why you always want to plant a few small fruited varieties, either the paste or the smaller size, the cherries, that sort of thing, because they're going to continue to give you tomatoes when your big tomatoes have stopped producing. And there are heat-setting varieties that are out there now, and they are better, but they're still going to stop after a while. So they're not going to go all summer long like they have tried to report about those. So that's why we have problems with summer tomatoes. When is a tomato ripe? When it turns red, right? Unless, of course, it's a yellow tomato or a purple tomato. But when you see a color change, that means that it's ripe. Well, you go to the store and all those tomatoes are beautiful. They're bright red. Are they ripe? Well, some of them might be and some of them might not be. Tomatoes go through stages. And one of the things that's interesting about tomatoes is that they ripen from the inside out. The middle of the tomato will be red before the skin turns red. Now, a lot of people say, well, you don't know, obviously you've never eaten a tomato before. You go to the store and you buy a tomato and you cut it open, and the center's still green a lot of the time. Well, the reason is because those are not vine-ripened tomatoes. Those have been chemically ripened. Now, if you expose the outside of the tomato to ethylene gas, it will cause it to start to ripen. What part of the tomato ripens first if it's been exposed to ethylene gas?
The outside, where it's exposed.
The outside where it's exposed, exactly. A vine-ripened tomato ripens on the inside first. So you cut it open, the core's white or the core's green, you know that tomato was not vine-ripened. Now, the thing that's interesting is that, according to the U.S. Department of Agriculture, that is a vine-ripened tomato. They consider vine-ripened mean that it's full size, still be 100% full grain, and be sold as a vine-ripened tomato. So you go to the store and it says vine-ripened, and it's bright red, and you go, oh boy. You go home, cut it open, it's white inside. Those are chemically ripened tomatoes. People say, well, I don't want to eat a chemically ripened tomato. Have you ever eaten a banana? They're all chemically ripened. They pump ethylene gas into chambers and cause the bananas to ripen when they want them to ripen. So they use ethylene gas. It's a naturally occurring gas. When tomatoes, apples, bananas rot, when they get old, they all release ethylene gas. So wait, you want, I have this going on at the house right now. We bought some avocados the other day. They were still a little too hard. Put them in a fruit bowl, stick the bananas on top of them. Bananas are releasing a ton of ethylene gas. It'll make those avocados ripen faster. So you can use stuff like that to now if you wanted the avocados to last longer, then keep them away from the bananas because they'll ripen faster. But anyway, if you'll pick your tomatoes at this stage, turning stage 3, when they're about when the skin is showing about 30% red, you will have, by the time they turn full red in the house, you'll have a fully vine-ripened tomato that has full vine-ripened flavor. Because the whole inside of the tomato is already red. Why would you do that? Why not just leave it on for 3 or 4 more days and let it turn full red? Well, have you ever heard of a mockingbird? You leave it out there to turn full red, the mockingbirds, the stink bugs, the squirrels, a whole bunch of other stuff are going to get a lot of the fruit. You can save a lot of production by picking them when they're just blushing pink. So when you see that spot of pink show up on the skin, that's when you want to pick them, and you'll get a lot more production out of your garden that way. I always miss a few, and I find them full red in the garden, and I'll pick them then, of course. But I look for any color. If I see color in the garden, I pick those that have color on them. Do you stake them or do you cage them? Doesn't make any difference. It's whatever you prefer. I cage them because it's simpler. I just keep poking the arms back into the cage and let it keep growing. If you stake them, you have to sucker them. You have to remove the side shoots. Only let 2 or 3 stalks grow up the stake because it's too hard to tie a big bushy plant up. If you cage them, you don't have to do that. You can just keep poking the arms in. If you stake them and you remove suckers, you'll get fewer total pounds of tomatoes, but the tomatoes you get will be bigger. So if you're trying to grow tomatoes for a tomato contest where you want the biggest tomatoes you can get, then you want to sucker them because the tomatoes you get will be bigger. If you're interested in pounds, you'll get more pounds if you don't sucker them, but the tomatoes' average size will be smaller. So caging them will produce more total pounds if you don't sucker them, but the tomatoes will be smaller. And this is what we mean by sucker them. In the union of a leaf and the stem, you'll get a little shoot coming out. That's the sucker. We just snap that little sucker out, and that prevents another branch from developing on the tomato plant. Be sure not to take the top sucker, the top shoot out, because you take the top shoot out and you'll terminate the plant and then it won't produce any more side branches. Okay. Done a lot of work on tomatoes over the last 40 plus years. This is a system we developed in Houston back when I was working there. It's really a good one. If you see anything in it you like, add it to what you're already doing. But our production is really amazing with this, and you'll see that when I get to the end of this. I like to take the tomatoes and put a handful, quarter to a half a cup of slow-release fertilizer in the hole when I plant. I like to buy big plants if I can find them. break off the lower leaves, turn the plant on its side, and lay it into a trench, and just let the tip of the plant stick up out of the soil. Bury the rest of the stem. The reason is because tomatoes will produce roots the whole length of the stem. You break off these lower branches, the lower leaves, and then you bury the stem. And when you get done, it looks something like this. Now people always say, well, I take the tip and I turn it up like this and then it snaps off, it breaks off. If you have trouble with that, take your plants out to the yard 2 or 3 days before you plant them and lay them all on their side. And by the time you get ready to plant them, all the tips will be sticking straight up in the air. Plants exhibit a characteristic called geotropism. They grow away from gravity and they grow toward the sun. So the tips will turn up, growing up towards the sun. Makes them real easy to plant. And here's the reason that we do it, because we get all these roots developing. The slow-release fertilizer provides them with nutrients for about 6 to 8 weeks. Wrap them in something, plastic bag, clean, row cover, something. Protect them from the wind. It's amazing how much better they'll produce when you plant these little bitty plants and you get them out there in the early spring. If you can protect them from the wind from the beginning. When the plants get up about halfway up the cage, take whatever you protected them with off, the row cover, plastic, whatever it is, because it will keep too much moisture in there and tend to make the plants have more disease problems. I like to provide them with a liquid fertilizer weekly. We try to do it once a week. I would try to do it at least once or twice a month if you can. You can water them down with it, you can put it in the soil, just get some liquid fertilizer on them. It really makes a difference in how they produce. When that first cluster sets, you look down in there and you see the first little tomatoes starting to develop. Put a little bit of high nitrogen fertilizer around the plants. They get into trouble when they're first developing the first cluster in that they don't have enough nutrients to keep the plants growing aggressively. They're putting all their food into these tomatoes that are starting to develop. So give them a little shot of nitrogen. I use ammonium sulfate, which is 2100, but you could use cottonseed meal, or blood meal is a good one because it's pretty readily available. And blood meal is a good organic fertilizer for those of you that are trying to be organic. That gives them a little boost, keeps them going. Okay, now doing this program. Big plants, plant them on their side, put slow release in the hole when you plant them, cover the cages with something to protect them from the wind, and give them a little shot of fertilizer when they set their first fruit. Water them as often as you can, up to once a week, with a liquid fertilizer. We consistently produce in excess of 50 pounds per plant on hybrid tomatoes, modern hybrid tomatoes. How many of you are getting 50 pounds per plant? Probably not any of you. But Bush Celebrity, 61 pounds per plant. In our trials, we would plant 3 plants of the same variety. We'd pick every usable fruit. We would weigh all the usable fruit off of those 3 plants, and then we would take that total and divide it by 3. And that would give us our average production per plant. Solar Set, 53. Donna, 53. Carnival, 54. Heatwave, 50. Early Girl, 50. Champion this is actually a picture of Champion. 73 pounds per plant was our average production on Champion. Champion's hard to find. The seed's almost unavailable now. There is a Champion number with the Roman numeral 3 after it, which is similar, but it's not the same Champion. And Celebrity wasn't in this trial, but it's always good, and we have used it for years. Celebrity is still a really good variety. And actually, all the modern hybrids will produce a lot if you go with that program. Juliet, little cherry tomato, 57 pounds per plant. Now you take a tomato that's this big. How many of them does it take to make 57 pounds?
A lot.
A lot. How many Juliet plants do you need? 1. Just 1. And you'll get more cherry tomatoes than you know what to do with. The only problem I have with Juliet is the bushes are huge. So plant them a little further apart because they're going to need the space. It's not uncommon for them to get well up over your head and be just about as wide as they are tall. They make very large plants, but they're hugely productive. And people like the quality of the fruit too. Baxter's Early Bush was not in this trial, but it's a good cherry we've used before. Sweet Chelsea's a big sweet cherry. Yellow Pear, for those of you that like heirlooms, Yellow pear is a good, nice heirloom tomato. It's a cherry type, kind of pear-shaped. Any questions on tomatoes before we move on to potatoes?
Regular, like you do heritage weird tomatoes, do they work as well?
They
Or
do
just-
not.
Okay.
Generally speaking, the heirloom varieties of tomatoes will produce much, much less than the hybrids, modern hybrids do. But a lot of people still choose to grow them because they like certain characteristics about them. So if you have one that's your particular favorite, I would say grow it and then put in some hybrids so that you have something for your salads and your hamburgers and stuff like that. Brandywine is one that everybody always talks about, and Brandywine is a terrible producer for us, just terrible. It's not uncommon for you to get 5 or 6 pounds of Brandywine per plant.
Wow.
And I was panning, I was saying bad things about Brandywine at a program once, and the lady came up afterwards and she said, you know, I really resent you talking bad about Brandywine. That's my favorite tomato, and we grow it every single year. And last year I had 500 pounds of Brandywine tomatoes. And I said, my gosh, that's unbelievable, 500 pounds. And I said, how many plants did you have? 150. That's about what I said. It's about 3 to 5 pounds per plant. That's about how that figures out. So I wasn't lying when I said that, lady. You just plant a lot of Brandywine plants. So that's the problem with a lot of the heirlooms, is they tend to be light producers for us. And really and truly, think about it. How many heirloom tomatoes have you ever read about that were developed in Madisonville, Texas, or Centerville, Texas, or Dallas, Texas? They're all developed in Illinois or Kentucky or, you know, somewhere other than here. They certainly weren't developed here.
What would a person do without those? What would a person without those tomatoes?
Huh?
What would a person do without those tomatoes?
The ones that we produced at the extension office.
Yes.
Well, a lot of them went on with master gardeners. We would take some to the pantries.
Okay.
Yeah. And some of the master gardener programs where they have big vegetable gardens, everything they pick goes straight to the pantries.
Okay.
Yeah. So each master gardener association does it a little bit differently.
Okay.
Yeah. Potatoes. Potatoes are a great vegetable. We got to get started early with them. If you're going to plant spring potatoes, you want to put them in about Valentine's Day, middle of February. You want to plant them about 4 to 6 inches deep. Cut the chunks up into pieces about the size of a chicken egg. They say about 2 to 2.5 ounces. I like to cut them a few days before I plant them so they have a chance for those cut surface areas to kind of dry up a little bit. Some people will dust them with sulfur or ag lime to dry those areas up. I just cut them a few days ahead of time. Make sure there's a good eye on each piece. Plant them about 4 to 6 inches deep. When the plants are up about 1 foot tall, like these are, bank soil up around the plants. The tubers develop off of the buried stem, the stem that's in the ground. So if you plant them about 4 to 6 inches deep, you've got 4 to 6 inches of stem. And then you put another 4 to 6 inches of soil over that, then you've got 8 to 12 inches of soil over the stem. That's all where your potatoes are going to come from. We've already pulled the soil. Can you see it's banked up against these plants right here? If you're going to plant potatoes in the fall, realize that they produce about half what they produce in the spring. Save some of your fall potatoes, some of your spring potatoes, save some of them. Pick out the nice pretty ones because those are the ones that are going to keep the best. And wait for them to the eyes to start to pop. Can you see the little eyes beginning to sprout? When they start to sprout, it's time to plant them. Now, if they don't start to sprout till September, then wait till September for it to plant them. If they don't start to sprout until October, then wait till October to plant them. You can't plant them before they start to sprout. You take a dormant potato, one that hasn't sprouted, and you plant it in hot soil, which all our soils are pretty hot right now. They will not sprout until the soil cools down. So keep them in a cool, dark place until they sprout, and then when they sprout, plant them. You'll get about half the production that you get with the potatoes during the spring season. So we average about 15 to 17 pounds in the spring per pound of potatoes planted. We average about 8 to 9 pounds per pound of potatoes planted in the fall. In the spring, when the potatoes start to form under the ground, you can go in and start robbing the new potatoes, pulling off some of those small potatoes, take them in to prepare them. Don't do that for too long, because if you do, you'll hurt your overall production. All these little potatoes are going to turn into big potatoes if you leave them in the ground. When the potatoes begin to die, the plants begin to die down, which they will when the season gets hot enough. When the soil gets to a certain temperature, air temperature gets to a certain temperature, the plants will begin to die. They're actually going dormant. That's when you dig the entire plant, and that's when you do the bulk of your harvesting. Now, do you see the white spots on these potatoes? Those were deep down in the hill, and they were exposed to a little too much moisture when they were being grown. There are little pores all over the skin of the potato, and if they're exposed to too much moisture, the pores expand. And these essentially are little lesions, little cuts that are open on the skin of the potato. So when you find this, you want to cook those potatoes first. Cook these first, because they're going to rot first, because they basically have little lesions on the skin, little openings on the skin. Save the pretty ones to cook later. Put them in a dark, cool spot, and use them as you want to use them. You can see here, see the little white specks all over the skin? That's those expanded pores. If you don't like to put your potatoes up dirty, we recommend you put them up dirty, knock the clods off of them and put them up dirty. If you're going to wash your potatoes before you put them up, we recommend that you use a fruit and vegetable wash, which is a mild Clorox solution. You can go online and find out about disinfecting vegetables with a mild Clorox solution. They give you the formula, how much Clorox to add to a gallon of water, and then you soak them and wash them in that. And then make sure before you put the potatoes up that you dry them really, really well, because if any of them are damp, it'll contribute to them rotting. And then you want to check them every few weeks to pull the rotten ones out. If you get a rotten one in there, you've heard the adage, one rotten tomato will make the whole barrel go rotten. Well, it will. And it's because it's releasing ethylene gas. So don't leave the rotten ones in there. Now remember I said heirlooms, not so good? This is an heirloom. This is an heirloom potato. And it's a variety called Russian banana. And I will tell you, it is the finest eating potato I have ever eaten. It's in the class that they call finger potatoes. You can find them online. Only thing I would tell you is that most of the online sources won't ship down this far south until April, and then it's too late for us to plant them. I found a location in Maine that grows them, that will ship them down here when you want them shipped down here. You'll spend as much money shipping as you do for the potatoes, because they have to put them in special freeze-proof packaging. It's called Wood Prairie Farms. They have a nice website. They sell about 40 different varieties of potatoes. One of them is this Russian banana finger potato. But in our taste trials, it won every single one of them.
When do you plant it? In the spring?
And I would try to get them. I would order them soon, with the idea of getting them by the first of the year,
Okay.
so that you've got them and they're ready to plant by mid-February.
And they'll just keep.
Yes.
Can just keep them.
Keep in a cool, dark place.
Okay.
Yeah. But try to line them up to come in shortly after the first of the year is what I try to do. If you wait too late, then you won't get them until it's too late to plant them. The thing I liked about them, number one, the quality is superb. And then number two, they outproduced everything else we were growing. 25 pounds was common per pound of potato planted. And that's a lot more than we get with red Lesotho and white Kennebec and the California potatoes and that sort of thing. And when you wash them up, here's what they look like.
When you plant them just like you did with the cut an eye, put it in, cut the potato, do it, or do you plant the whole thing?
About the size of a chicken egg.
Yeah.
Each piece needs to be about the size of a chicken egg.
Okay.
So in the case of these, a big one you might cut into 3 pieces.
Okay.
A lot of them you would just cut in half
Okay.
and plant the 2 halves. Yeah.
Thank you.
When you say in a dark, cool place, it's so hard to find that.
You don't have a root cellar?
Oh, no.
I keep them in the bottom of our pantry, in the kitchen,
Okay,
on the tile floor.
okay.
You could, that's where we keep them.
Okay.
But yeah, unfortunately, down here we don't have root cellars. But I actually knew a lady who kept them under. She had a great big pecan tree in her yard, and she kept them in a box with a cover on them under the pecan tree, out in the yard.
An ant didn't get to them?
I don't know. That's what she's. Yeah, but anyway.
Okay.
But that's where I keep them, is in the pantry on the
Okay,
floor.
thank you.
Yeah. Eggplants, easy vegetable for us to grow. They do great in containers. Main thing on eggplant is you want to pick them when they're immature. If you let them get too mature, they become bitter. And the way you tell if they're mature is that the skin will turn dull. If the skin is real shiny, these look like they've been waxed. They're so shiny. Those are at the right stage. You want that skin to be real shiny. You're always better off picking them too early than waiting and picking them too late. The white fruited varieties are novelties. They generally are considered poor quality. Same thing with the egg-shaped varieties like this. The long varieties tend to be the highest quality, highest producers. Black Beauty is the one that everybody finds at the garden centers and stuff, but this is Ishibon. This real long one is called Ping Tung Long. That's dusky. The long fruited Asian types are usually much higher quality. This is actually a Louisiana variety called Louisiana Long Green, and is considered to be a real premium quality eggplant. It may be old, but I may have some seed. If you want me to, it's some that I got out of an eggplant, but if you want me to send it to you, you could give it to the Master Gardeners.
Sure.
And but that's a real high quality one. Give me your card so I got your address. I can find it online. This is a variety that's on the internet under the name of Purple Rain. And when we grew it, it was an Italian variety. It was called Listata de Gandia. And it's real premium, small to medium-sized eggplant. And thank you, sir. And considered to be a real good one. This was an All-America selection a number of years ago. It's called Fairy Tales. Makes a real compact plant. It's a great one for growing in containers. The fruit only get to be about 3 inches long and about an inch and a half in diameter, but they're long clusters of them. This is real decorative. It's very decorative in a container as well. So you have lots of choices as far as eggplants are concerned. Bell peppers. Most people want their bell peppers to get bigger. And the key thing on getting bell peppers bigger is you got to fertilize them aggressively, and you got to buy hybrid varieties. If you buy the old open pollinated varieties, which is commonly what you find at the garden centers and feed stores, varieties like YOLO Wonder, California Wonder, Whopper, those older varieties, they just don't size up very well for us. One of the ones that you do find pretty often at garden centers and feed stores is a variety called Big Bertha. This is Big Bertha right here, and it does get very large. So you want the hybrid varieties. Wait to plant a little later than you do with tomatoes. Tomatoes, we want to get them in pretty early, but wait on your peppers till your soil gets warm, 65 to 70 degrees. So you're planting them a little bit later. Frequent light doses of nitrogen. So you go with blood meal if you're organic, you go with 2100 if you're not organic. You could even use cottonseed meal, but about every 3 to 4 weeks, give them a little shot of nitrogen. If you want big, big peppers, because that's how you get the size up. And then take the first fruit or flower off. And these little bitty plants have a fruit on them, and that fruit tries to develop on this little bitty plant. It tends to stunt the plant, and the fruit never reaches its full potential. So take off the first flower or the first fruit. This one's Big Bertha. This is Bell Boy. Both of them are green peppers that turn red when they ripen. It's the biggest pepper I've ever grown, called Jackpot. It turns bright yellow when it ripens. They can be 6-7 inches long and 5-6 inches in diameter. They're really, really big. Purple Beauty is a black purple pepper that turns bright, bright red when it ripens. Golden Summer is not as big as the rest of these, but it's a chartreuse colored pepper that turns golden yellow. Jupiter is a red bell pepper. Sensation is a yellow bell pepper. And then this Blushing Beauty starts out kind of ivory colored, and then it turns kind of orangey, and then it turns a bright red. And it's kind of an interesting, it was an All-America selection as well. Also, the hot peppers are really, really popular. And it's funny, we're getting really, really hot colors on the pictures. And the computer's not showing it that way, so something about the way it's coming through. They measure heat in peppers with what they call Scoville units. And bell pepper is between 0 and say 300 to 400 Scoville units. Bell peppers get hot. If they're put under stress or too much heat, too dry, they can develop a little bit of heat in them. People always blame it on the fact that they're planted too close to their jalapenos, but that has no effect on the fruit. It may affect the seed inside if you plant the seed, but it's not going to affect the flavor of the pepper. But they all have different Scoville unit rating depending on what they are. These are red habaneros, 150,000 to 450,000 Scoville units. That's a hot pepper. Chili Tapine, 50 to 100,000. Tabasco, 50 to 80,000. 55 to 80,000. Jalapenos are just real wimps. 3,500 to 10,000 Scoville units. Now, I grow a variety of jalapenos called Senorita. I actually make a special effort to buy the seed and plant the seed, grow them out at the house. And the reason I grow them is because they're about 1,000 Scoville units. And we can a lot of jalapenos. And everybody likes a little bit of heat, but they don't like a whole bunch of heat. And they like them better. So there are some mild jalapenos on the market that are about 1,000 Scoville units, and Senorita happens to be one of them. Yellow mushroom. The wings are mild like a bell. The core is hot like a jalapeno. Serranos are 15 to 30,000. Habaneros are 150 to 350,000. Not quite as hot as the red habaneros. Then you have the ghost pepper, which is 1 million. And you have Carolina Reaper, which is about 2 million Scoville units. And people have gone nuts about growing these killer hot peppers. So, let's see, it's University of New Mexico has a seed repository where you can buy seed of all these super killer hot. Just go to buy pepper seed at University of New Mexico and they'll take you to their catalog and you can buy all these super hot peppers. Yes?
Ancho?
Ancho is a chili. It's one of the chilies. It's considered to be one of the milder of the hot peppers.
Okay.
And, of course, they have the hatch pepper,
Yeah.
which is an ancho type pepper. It's funny because people think, well, I want to buy a hatch pepper because I want to grow the hatch pepper. The only way you can grow the hatch pepper is to move to the Hatch County, New Mexico. Because they grow about 4 or 5 different chilies in that county. Ancho is probably the primary one, but there's a few others as well. And they're all called the hatch pepper.
Okay.
It's kind of like Oletha corn. Have you ever heard of Oletha sweet corn? Well, that's a region in Colorado where they grow a lot of sweet corn, and any of the corn they ship out of that area is sold as Oletha corn. Have you ever heard of the, the onion? Vidalia. They grow the same onion in the valley that they grow in Vidalia, Georgia. The Vidalia, Georgia onion is different because of the soils and the environmental condition.
Okay.
And so a lot of these are regional names, not variety names. So you can't buy a Vidalia onion to plant in your garden because you're not living in Vidalia. Diseases on tomatoes and on this whole family. This is early blight, which is a fungus. The leaves turn yellow, then they turn brown, starts at the bottom, works its way up. It can be very serious. Mulches is a really good way of trying to help control it. Also planting the plants further apart. When you get to your pathology class, one of the things you're going to learn is air circulation, drying the plants, that sort of thing can be helpful in reducing disease problems. This is caused by a lack of calcium. It's called blossom end rot. Now it can be caused by not enough water or too much water, but it's all the result of calcium. If there's too much water, the plant can't take up the calcium. If there's not enough water, the plant can't take up calcium. If there's no calcium in the soil, the plant can't take up calcium. So all of those things are related to calcium. So watch the watering and make sure your soil has plenty of calcium in it. This is the tomato hornworm. The 2-brick method still works. Take worm, put on one brick, slap it with the other brick. Still works. You can use an insecticide called BT, Bacillus thuringiensis. BT is an absolutely organic product. It will not hurt. Matter of fact, it just works on caterpillars pretty much. Problem is, by the time you find the caterpillar, you don't have any leaves left on your tomato. So you have to think about it when you spray with BT and try to start early. I don't usually see the worms until the end of May, so I'll start spraying with BT every week or so, starting in the latter part of April. Because you got to catch them when the worms are little bitty. They eat the BT organism and they die when they're little. So that's how you do that. Biggest problem we have on tomatoes and peppers is the leaf-footed bug. It's in the stink bug family. It's a huge problem. And I'm going to talk about control of it here in just a minute. Causes those white specks on your tomato fruit. Here's the immature stage. Looks a lot like an assassin bug, which is also a good guy. So the way you tell the difference between a leaf-footed bug and an assassin bug is if you got 1 or 2 of them, it's probably an assassin bug. If you have 100 or 200 of them, it's a leaf-footed bug. You never get big populations of the predators because the female will lay a cluster of eggs, and the first assassin bug to hatch out will sit there and wait for brother and sister. And as the others hatch, he or she will eat the babies as they hatch until there are none left, and then it goes off and starts hunting for food. So you rarely ever get big numbers of the assassin bugs showing up. Isn't that something? Is this on your printout? Can y'all read this on your printout?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, take your pen or your pencil and put a line right below permethrin. You see it? Right below permethrin. Everything above that line is not organic. Everything below that line is organic. Pyrethrum is an organic form of the toxin present in the pyrethrum daisy. Permethrin is a man-made synthetic pyrethrin. So chemically they're very similar, but one's made by man, one's made by nature. I would say that if you're not real organic, that you're going to get better control with permethrin, bifenthrin, and cyfluorethrin than you will with pyrethrum, and have about the same environmental effect. They're more stable, they're more toxic to the insects, but chemically they're very similar to the organic pyrethrum. Okay, put a line between 7 and BT. 7 is not organic, BT and insecticidal soap are. BT for caterpillars is the best thing going. I don't care whether you're an organic gardener or not. That's the best thing to use for caterpillars. If you have butterfly plants in your yard, stay away from them with BT because BT will kill caterpillars. That's what it does. I would not recommend 7 to any of you. 7 kills bees, and so we have to be really careful with how we use 7. On diseases, and you can use this table for all your vegetables, put a dash by copper products. There are a whole bunch of copper fungicides. Some of them are man-made and some of them are organic. You can buy organic forms of copper. And be careful when using copper fungicides at your house. because many plants in your garden are going to be, the copper is going to be toxic to them. Peaches and plums, it'll knock every leaf off your peach and plum. It'll burn the fool out of all the squash relatives. Cantaloupe, cucumber, squash, just pumpkins, melons, just burn them up. So you can't use copper products on them, so be careful about that. But copper's a good fungicide for a lot of funguses. This is a bacteria, Bacillus subtilis, but it's a bacteria that controls fungi. And then potassium bicarbonate is very similar to sodium bicarbonate, which is baking soda, right? So baking soda is a pretty good fungicide. If you wanted a home remedy, you might try baking soda. Tablespoon or two of baking soda in a gallon of water is a pretty good home remedy fungicide. But you now have this so you can refer to it on, and it's true for all the vegetables. If it's a caterpillar, use something in this column. If it's a bug, use something in this column. If it's a fungus, use something in this column. This is Tyler. Tyler's my oldest grandson. He's 26 now. He was probably 3 or 4 when that picture was taken. And he lived in the vegetable garden with his grandpa. Legumes are green beans, lima beans, southern peas, English peas, edible potted peas, soybeans, hinkama. Do you know what hinkama is?
Yeah.
Hinkama is that great big root that you see at the grocery store sometimes. It has kind of a nutty flavor to it. It's real high in protein. Anyway, that's the root of a legume, a bean. We have trouble growing it here because it needs short days. So by the time it starts to produce a tuber, we get into winter and it's too cold. So they grow that in other parts of the world. And then runner beans, which produces a great big pod, but if you eat the pod when it's real and mature, it is edible. It can get to be toxic if you wait too long. So I don't really advocate anything that you have to worry about it being toxic. So that's not one I worry too much about. Green beans are a good one for the new gardener because they're relatively easy. They can be grown in pots, but I will tell you that the production is not, you need a lot of them to really produce a lot. Anytime after your spring freeze, you can start planting, and you continue planting until early summer. And then you can start, actually you could plant green beans right now, and as long as you plant the bush types, the early maturing ones, you probably have time to get them done before the first freeze. The pole types we generally only suggest for spring planting because they take longer to mature, and it's not usually good for the fall garden. I will suggest to you, if you like pole beans, there's a variety on the market called rattlesnake that is one of the best pole beans I have ever seen. They grow it a lot in Mississippi and Georgia for roadside stand production. And you have to go to the internet and type in rattlesnake green bean, and it'll give you 2 or 3 seed companies that sell the seed of rattlesnake. But it's a really good, if you like pole beans, it's a really good one. They don't need as much fertility as we did with tomatoes, so generally you fertilize them when you plant them. As soon as they start to flower, I usually will lightly side dress them, and that's about it. You want to harvest when the pods are young and tender, before the seeds begin to swell in the pods. If you look at it and see, like, I don't know if you can see it, this one here, you can see the seeds swollen in the pods. Those are just a little bit over mature. You want to try to catch them before the seeds swell in the pods for best quality. And your spring beans will not be as good in quality as your fall beans. Fall beans by far are the best quality we can grow because they're ripening when the weather is cooling instead of ripening when the weather is heating up. So you get better quality green beans in the fall than you do in the spring. Southern peas includes cream sprouters, purple hulls, black eyes. They like the heat. Don't get in a hurry trying to get them planted. Generally wait till the end of April, maybe even May or even June to plant them. One of the few vegetables we can grow in the middle of the summer. Because they're a legume, they fix nitrogen in the soil, so they make the soil better than they start with. So you can actually improve the soil of your garden by planting legumes. Worked with a lady up in New Waverly that had a 10-acre organic farm, and she would use legumes in the summer as a cover crop. She'd plant her black-eyed peas, she'd wait till they started to flower, and then she would plow them under. And then she would plant them again and wait for them to start to flower, and she would plow them under. She was using it to build organic matter into her soil and to fix nitrogen in their soil. So she was using it to improve the quality of the soil that she had. She was not using it as a crop. They prefer warm soils, so don't get in a hurry. Wait to plant them until things get really warm. Only moderate fertility generally can get by with fertilizing when you plant them. And as soon as they start to vine, they'll start to run. You don't have to train them on a trellis, but when they start kind of getting leggy, you go out there and give them a light side dressing, and that's about it. Harvest when the pods are mature and starting to yellow. In the case of southern peas, we're eating the peas, the seeds. So we want the seeds to be fully developed in the pods. So when the pods are full size and beginning to yellow. And I remember when I first moved to the Montgomery County that all the feed stores had shellers in the feed stores, and you could bring them a bushel of peas and they'd dump them in there and they'd hand you a bag of freshly shelled peas. Now you got to shell them yourself. So, and that, I bet you we very few of us have grandchildren or children that have ever shelled peas. Edible potted peas are one of my favorites. I call them the Snickers bars of the garden. We never have eaten edible potted peas cooked in the house, except the ones I bought at the store, because all the ones in the garden get eaten by the kids and grandkids. We generally plant them September through January, and you guys really need to finish up planting them probably in November. January planted ones are going to probably get frozen in February by the excessively cold weather that you all get. They only need moderate fertility, kind of like we do fertilizing when you're planting, fertilize when they start to run. They all need vertical support. They all need trellises of some sort. I would suggest varieties like Sugar Snap, probably one of the better varieties. There's a variety called Super Sugar Snap, which is a little bit better, I think, a little more productive. They don't produce a lot, but what they do produce is very high quality. They're just sweet as candy. That's why the grandkids eat them in the garden before you get a chance to get them in the house. Light producers, but very high quality.
You eat them, you don't eat the peas themselves, you eat the whole.
Okay, we've got English peas.
Yes.
Which are shelled, and you eat the peas.
Right.
Primarily grown up in the north. Canada grows a lot of them in places like that. Then you've got the snow pea, which is the one that's popular in Chinese food that's flat. And they pick it when it's still flat because it gets real high fiber if you let it get full size. And then they've got the Sugar Snap peas, which we pick when the pea is full developed in the pod, but the pods remain real tender and young, and they're very sweet. And you eat the pod and all.
Okay.
But if you tried to eat a English pea variety, it would be like chewing on bamboo. The peas would be soft and tender inside, but the shell would be very hard to chew. So Sugar Snap is sort of a separate class. Common diseases and insects on legumes. Probably the main problem we have with them is thrips. That's that little microscopic or near microscopic insect. Can you see how distorted and twisted the leaves are? That's the damage caused by the thrips. The thrips also transmit pea and bean mosaic virus, and that's what's causing the mottled appearance to that leaf. No cure for viruses. Try to control the thrips if you can. And then pull the plants out that show that distorted, twisted growth, because it's not going to go away, and it can be carried on to other plants in the planting. Aphids also can be a problem. I use hard water spray for aphids. Mine are in pots, so there's not a big area, but if you had a big area, I'd spray with either one of the oil sprays. You could use soaps. Be careful with soaps. On a bright sunny day, soaps will burn peppers and peas, both of them. But hard water spray works really well for me in my small garden. And that's just where you use a hard stream of water to wash them off. You get them off the plants, they got little short legs, it takes them a long time to walk back up again. A lot of stuff will get them while they're doing that. Corn is one of the few grasses that we grow in the garden. And in my opinion, there's nothing better than fresh sweet corn, especially if it's picked at the right stage. And the only problem is sweet corn takes up a good bit of space. So a lot of people don't have a garden that's really big enough to accommodate sweet corn. Sweet corn needs to be planted in blocks, multiple rows side by side, because the tassels produce the pollen. The pollen falls down and lands on the silks, and that's what fertilizes the kernels inside of the ear. So after the last freeze, through April, if you plant much past the end of April, you have the potential for weevil and a lot of corn earworm problems. Weevils can be a big problem as we move into the summer months. Fall corn I've never grown before, but I'd say it's worth a try. Just make sure you back up enough time. So you're probably going to be planting in August to get it done before freeze. So it's probably too late already. When the plants are about a foot tall, you fertilize at planting, primarily nitrogen, high first number. Fertilize when the plants are about a foot tall. And at that same time that you do that fertilizing, pull soil up around the plants. Corn will produce aerial roots. These are roots that will come out of the stalk to help anchor the plant better. Corn has a real problem with what they call lodging. So we'll get those summer thunderstorms when the plants get tall, and they literally will lay the corn down. When the corn lays down, if it produces the tassel after that, you don't get any pollination because the tassels need to be up at the top. So if you pull soil up around them, that'll keep them from falling over so much. And then you fertilize them again as soon as you see that tassel starting to come up through the whorl. The whorl is that roll of leaves in the top of the corn plant. When that starts to happen, you fertilize them the last time. So you fertilize them 3 times with a high nitrogen fertilizer. There's a ton of different kinds of corns out there now. There's field corn, right? I still have friends that's what they want to eat is field corn. That's the kind of corn that they grew up. They call them roasting ears. Actually, they call them roasting ears. There's no G on the end of that. It's roasting ears. And then you've got sweet corn. Sweet corn was a gene variant that occurred that the ears were sweeter than the roasting ears, than the regular field corn. And that's what people grew for a long, long time. Then there came the super sweets. The sugar enhanced. These were a little bit sweeter, but the sugar wasn't stable within the ear, so that it would eventually degrade and you'd have a starchy ear. Then they developed the super sweets. The super sweets were not as creamy as the regular ears, but they had a really high sugar content, and the sugar was stable. So you could take that ear of corn, you could shuck it, you could freeze it, bring it out 6 months later, and it still would be sweet, and it would still be a crisp kernel. The kernel would remain sweet. Most corn, when you freeze it, it gets mushy, kind of mushy. Then they developed the latest group is they call the triple sweets. And the triple sweets are supposed to have the characteristics of all. The creaminess, the high sugar, the sort of have a blending or a melting of all of the different qualities about it. So basically there's a lot of different corns out there. This is a variety, this is a triple sweet. This is a variety called Serendipity. And it's a bicolor, it's a very nice, really a good variety. But there's lots of good varieties out there. About 90% of the ears will be harvestable the same day. So you go out there and you shuck an ear and it's ready, chances are everything in the planting that was planted that day is going to be ready to pick that same day. Chances are, or at least close to all of it. With most sweet corns, you get 1 good ear per plant. You might get a secondary little small ear, sometimes it shows up on them, but you can really only count on 1 good ear per plant. Whereas field corn will have, 4 or 5, a whole bunch of them. If you're growing corn to pickle, to make the little pickled ears, you know what I'm talking about? Grow a popcorn variety. You pick the corn as soon as the silk appears, pick the ear as soon as the silk appears, shuck it, peel the husk off, and you'll have an basically the embryo, immature ear, and that's what you use to pickle. But the reason we use a popcorn instead of a sweet corn is because you'll get 7 or 8 ears on a stalk as compared to 1.5 on sweet corn. Interesting thing to me about sweet corn, this is an ear that was picked as soon as the silks appeared, and it was shucked. So those kernels have not developed yet. One silk attaches to one kernel. One pollen grain has to land on every single silk, travel down the silk to the kernel that it's attached to in order for that kernel to develop inside that ear. That's the reason you shuck an ear and there's all these holes in it, because it didn't have enough pollen fall on the silks to fertilize every kernel in that ear. That's why you got to plant them in blocks to get enough pollen so that they all develop. And you know, if man had come up with that plan, I'm sure it would probably never work.
Are you going to tell us how to plant the corn?
Huh?
How do you plant corn? Just
You buy the
Rows filled
seeds,
up?
just till her up, pull up your rows, cut a trench. I usually plant it about every 3 to 4 inches apart, and then I'll come back in and chop out every other one. I want them to be about 6 to 8 inches apart in the row. And then when they get up to a foot tall, which doesn't take long, then you bank soil up around them to keep them from falling over.
how much do you plant in a block?
I'd make the rows, usually the rows are about 2.5 to 3 feet apart, and I would make the block at least 6 feet long.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. And what you can do is you can plant that whole block, you know, you got 3 or 4 rows, plant that whole block 6 feet long, and then wait a couple weeks and then plant another 6 feet, and
Okay.
wait a couple weeks, and that way you'll have it over a period of time. Because otherwise everything in that block's going to come ready at the same time. This is corn earworm, which is the biggest problem on corn. Corn is the most sprayed vegetable you all purchase. It can be sprayed over 20 times a season. And the reason they spray it so much so often is because of the corn earworm. Because once it gets in the ear, the chemicals don't work on it, so they got to keep it from getting in the ear. So they keep spraying it to do that. Now, I don't know about y'all, but when I was a kid, I was the one who got to shuck all the corn. And every single ear had a worm in it. And nobody seemed to get upset about it. You'd either cut the top of the ear off, or if the worm went into the center of the ear, you'd cut that little place out of the side of the ear. Now everybody wants to take the darn stuff back to the grocery store if they find a worm in their corn. Well, we as a people would be healthier if we buy the corn that has the worms in it, because that's the stuff that's not getting sprayed 20 times a season. So I just get a little irritated because we got it's sort of. I have the same problem with seedless grapes and seedless watermelon. You mean we can't spit anymore? Come on, that's part of the fun of watermelon is spitting, right? Yeah. And I still think watermelon with seeds tastes so much better than seedless, but that's just me. This is something you don't see very often. What do you see 2 worms in that ear. The worms are cannibalistic. If they run into their brother or sister in the top of that ear, one of them is going to be gone. They will eat their brothers and sisters. So you rarely see 2 in the same ear. But anyway, that's our biggest problem. We do get weevils sometimes, and they can get rust. This is rust on corn. Rust is a fungus disease. Generally, it doesn't show up until after the season is about to end. So you got all these old stalks hanging around in the garden that you haven't got rid of it, and the leaves get rust on them. Best thing to do is to get those out of there and dispose of them, not chop that up and turn it back under again, because the rust will persist in the leaf trash in the ground, and it will re-inoculate next season. So if you start seeing these red streaks and you rub that and your hands just look rusty red, you've got rust. Get those plants out of there, get them disposed of, put them in a burn pile, or have the trash man take them off. I wouldn't even compost them, I'd just get rid of them. The cucurbit family is a group of annual vines. It includes cucumber, squash, cantaloupe, watermelon, honeydew, pumpkins, and gourds. One of the main characteristics of this group is that they all have male flowers and female flowers separately, but on the same plant. And a lot of people don't understand this. They think there's little boy plants and little girl plants. And some plants there are little boy plants and little girl plants. But most plants have complete flowers that have both the male and female reproductive parts in the same flower. I'd say 90% of them probably. Squash is a little unique in this, in that it has a male flower that does not produce fruit, or this family does, and a female flower which does produce fruit. So the male flowers are just there to provide the pollen, and that's their only purpose in the garden. But you got to have them. Many of you may feel the same way about your spouse. You got to have them. You know, they take out the trash. You got to have them. Okay, so anyway, this is the group. Okay, this is a squash plant. This is yellow squash. Now, is that a little boy flower or a little girl flower? What do you see behind the flower?
The girl gets the fruit, right?
That's right. Those are female flowers because the squash is there. The male flower does not have the squash. Will never have the squash. This is a female. This is a zucchini. This is a female zucchini. You see this little bitty one right here? That's the zucchini right there. So even when they're teenitesy, the fruit is there. And one of the things that happens a lot is people will call the extension office and they'll say, I got squash all over my plants, but they're all rotting. Well, if that flower doesn't get fertilized, if a bee doesn't move the pollen from the male flower to the female flower, there's a squash there. But it goes whoops, and it begins to rot and die. That's lack of pollination. The squash was there before the flower even opened, so the squash isn't going to go anywhere. And the only reason it rots is because it didn't get fertilized. There's no pollen present. So that's why bees are so important to us in the garden. You can hand pollinate them, but every day you would have to go out and you would have to do it again, because the flowers that were open yesterday are not going to be open today. And the flowers that are open today are not going to be open tomorrow. They're only open for one day. And you actually have to get out there fairly early in the day, because the flowers will close about midday. And once the flower closes, it's no longer receptive. And you can rip it open and pollinate it and it won't work. So you got to catch it when those flowers are nice and open. So I tell people all the time, the little girls are only in the moods in the morning. One of those things you got to keep in mind. This is a cucumber. Is that a little boy cucumber or a little girl cucumber? That's a little girl, because you got the little fruit behind it. Now this is a male cucumber flower. There's no fruit behind it. And the same thing's true of watermelon and pumpkins and gourds. The other thing that you'll notice is that you generally get a lot more male flowers than you get female flowers. And this is especially true of pumpkins and watermelon and cantaloupe. You may literally have thousands of male flowers and only a few handful of female flowers. So it's way outnumber the other. They want to make sure that there's lots and lots of pollen around. But it also throws people off, because quite often the male flowers will show up first. So you'll get this big flurry of male flowers, no squash. So people will call the office again and say, my squash has been blooming for 2 weeks. I don't have any squash. Well, do you have any little girl squash? Dead silence. They don't know what in the world you're talking about. Well, I have any little girl squash. So then you have to explain to them that there's got to be a little squash fruit behind the flower before they'll start getting squash. And if all they've got is male flowers, they're not going to get any until the female flowers start to show up. And you just got to be patient and wait for that to happen. And it's going to happen. Excuse me. Cucumbers generally plant after the last freeze and continue planting through the month of May. And then if you're going to put them in the fall, you've got to get started early. We're probably too late to plant any now to have them actually finish, unless you have a way of protecting them. Put them in a small greenhouse or something like that, because the freeze is going to get them. Moderate fertility, generally fertilize them at planting, and then when they start to vine, as soon as they start to run, fertilize them, side dress them one more time, and you're pretty much done for the season. My personal feeling is with cucumbers, people will try to keep their plants for too long and continue picking off of them. Cucumbers begin to get a lot of mildew, both powdery and downy mildew, and it's probably best to just rip them out and replant, or plant a little bit, wait 6 or 8 weeks, or until you just begin to pick, and plant some more. And then when you get done picking the first round of cucumbers off of the plants, rip the plants up and hope that the new planting is beginning to produce. Because if those old plants stay, they just get to where they're so diseased that they're just not productive at all. So the new plants will help to refurbish production, keep things going. They trellis beautifully, they climb on their own. This is a pickling type cucumber, and that's a slicing type cucumber. You can pickle slicers, and you can slice pickling. Doesn't matter. So if you grow pickling cucumbers, they're perfectly fine to slice up and put in a salad. And if you grow slicers, as a matter of fact, a lot of people will grow the slicing cucumbers, and that's what they use to make their bread and butter pickles out of. So both of them can be used. If you're going to pickle them, you pickle them when the cucumber is the size you want to pickle. If you're making the gherkins, you'll pick them when the cucumbers are little bitty. If you're doing the big dills or spears, you wait till they get larger to pick them. If you're doing them for slicing, then you want them to be near mature, but not to the point that the seeds are starting to get hard inside the fruit. So you want, this is actually probably about the perfect size to pick for a slicing cucumber. And any of these could be sliced. They could probably go a little bit bigger before you'd have to pick them to slice, but any of them could be sliced.
Why do they get better? Sorry to ask.
Usually bitterness is a sign of either plants, with most vegetables, bitterness is a sign of either overmaturity or plant stress or both.
Okay.
And in the case of cucumbers, it's usually related to overmaturity and plant stress, so both.
Okay.
There are some varieties that are less prone to that than others, and you've probably seen them in the catalogs where they say bitterless or less likely to become bitter, and there are some that are like that, but they all, if they're put into a lot of stress, will become bitter.
Okay.
And then eggplant is all over maturity. If you let your eggplant get over mature, they're going to be bitter. Even turnips will get bitter if you allow them to over mature. A lot of these things have a time that's perfect to pick them. Okay, so squash we're planting March through May, and then we can plant them also in September if you're planting the bush types. You know, the winter squash, what they call winter squash, are usually vining types. They'll send vines long distances. Those generally would have to be planted a lot earlier, probably in May, if you're going to produce them, because they take a long time to mature. So the winter squash, we're not planting in the winter, we're storing in the winter. That's why they call them winter squash. The only difference between a winter squash and a summer squash is when they're harvested. All squash can be harvested as a winter squash, and all squash can be harvested as a summer squash. So you could take that acorn squash that you're growing, pick it when it's real and mature, and slice it up, cook it with a little butter, and it would be tender and good to eat as a summer squash. Or you can let it get great big, get a hard rind on it, throw it in the back of the pantry, come back 4 months later, take it out, bake it, and you've got a winter squash. You can do the same thing with zucchini. You let those zucchinis that you pick like this, and you can cut them open and empty the seed cavity out, and then either chop them up and cook them or bake them, and they work just fine. What's determined what we call a winter squash and what we call a summer squash is more custom than anything else. They all can be used either way. So zucchini and yellow crookneck are generally thought of as being summer squash, and all the rest are generally thought of as winter squash. But one of the trends you're going to find in the seed catalogs that's already started is that a lot of places are now selling little patty pan squash. Matter of fact, there's a variety out now called Sunburst, which is yellow and green, and it's a little patty pan squash, and it's being harvested when it's immature as a summer squash. It's not being kept till it's mature and used as a winter squash. And there are several acorn varieties that they've developed that they're using as summer squash also. Moderate fertility levels, Harvest winter squash when the rinds are tough and the fruit is completely mature. And you harvest the summer squash when they're tender and immature. This is kind of an interesting picture. That flower right there is about to open. The one next to it opened the day before, 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 the day before. From here to here is 1 week.
Oh, wow.
That shows you how fast these guys develop. That's why you go out today and you don't see anything, and you go out tomorrow and you got a squash this big. Now that probably didn't really happen, but that's the way you perceive it. They can just grow so fast that you're shocked by one that you didn't see the day before. Melons include watermelons and cantaloupe, and we like to plant them later, April through July. And you can actually go into August. And generally speaking, the later ones will produce the better quality fruit. Because cantaloupe and watermelon need to mature the fruit during dry conditions when there's very little rainfall. And spring planted, usually we get those early summer rains and they just ruin the quality of the fruit. If you go out and the cantaloupe is just about ready to pick and then you get a half-inch rain, it'll totally destroy the quality of the fruit. So you don't want rain as the fruit's maturing on watermelon or cantaloupe. That's why the pecos melons are so good. They get 3 inches of rain a year. And the only time they get water on their cantaloupes and watermelons and pecos is when they water them, when they irrigate. They don't get rain any other time. Moderate fertility levels, you fertilize at planting, you wait till they begin to run, and then you fertilize them again. This picture was sent to me by one of the seed companies, being as a county horticulturist and working in the vegetable industry and stuff. I would get all kinds of stuff sent to me. This was a new bush-type cantaloupe that they were promoting. Now, if you look at this, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 cantaloupe on that little bitty plant ready to pick. I can almost promise you that they picked those cantaloupes somewhere else and stuck them in that plant. I can almost promise you that. Now, would I say that they would lie? I would never say that. But they will they will lie in those catalogs. You got to be careful. But you're generally not going to see anything like that ever happening. Cantaloupe, you harvest when it's at full slip. Cantaloupe will literally tell you when it's ready to harvest. The stem attaches to the cantaloupe in this little cup called a slip. When the cantaloupe is fully mature, the layer of cells that attaches the stem to the fruit will die and cause that stem literally to slip free of the fruit. And all you'll have is a little sunken in spot on the cantaloupe. So you go out to the garden and you pick up the cantaloupe and the stem's still attached to it, set it back down again, it's not ready. You pick it up and the stem falls off, it's ready. Cantaloupe will soften and color, but it will not improve in quality once it's been picked. So you pick it, it's as good as it gets. That's why you rarely get a good cantaloupe at the grocery store. Now, watermelon, really hard to tell when it's ripe. Do you see that little curlicue, the little tendril right there that attaches to the vine right where the stem comes in? Here's the stem to the watermelon. It attaches to the vine right there's that curlicue. When that curlicue turns brown, that's probably as good an indicator that that watermelon is ready to pick. It does not always work, and it works better on some varieties than others, but that's probably as good as it gets. The only way I know to tell if a watermelon's right is to cut it open and taste it, and most places won't let you do that. My wife's ornery, though. I've had her take watermelons back to the grocery store before. This watermelon's no good, I want my $5 back. Pantyhose melons. This can be used on cantaloupe, watermelon, pumpkins. You can do it on a lot of different things. You take the leg section of pantyhose when the fruit's small, about this big, train it up on a trellis. When the fruit's about this big, you slip it into the little sack of the pantyhose and then you tie it up to the trellis and the melon develops inside the pantyhose and it expands as it develops, and then when it's ready, it falls loose of the vine. You go out there and cut it loose and you've got a cantaloupe ready. Perfect, no blemishes, spots, no bug eats, nothing like that. And you can do the same thing on watermelon. You do need to stick with the smaller fruiting varieties. Now, if you decide you want to grow an 85-pound black diamond watermelon, then you got to buy the queen-size pantyhose. Now, we used to have pantyhose in our house. I have to go to the store now and buy pantyhose, and I'll tell you that they look at you very funny when you go into Walmart and buy a bunch of knee-highs in the eggs. But women just don't wear pantyhose anymore, at least not around my house anyway. Biggest problem you're going to have on the cucurbit family is powdery mildew. Powdery mildew will show up as a white grayish powder generally on the upper surface of the leaf. Then the leaves will turn brown and it'll look like a crispy critter, like it's been fired by a fire. There are some resistant varieties out there that as you're reading through the seed catalogs you might look for that, but generally speaking they all get it eventually. And that's where planting a little bit and waiting 6 or 8 weeks and planting a little bit more. The newer planted stuff won't have the disease yet, the older planted stuff will. So as the older planted stuff goes out, then you've got the newer stuff starting to come in and produce.
You can just take it and burn it?
Yeah, just take it, put it in the trash or burn it or whatever. I would not use it in the compost pile. Yeah. Biggest problem people run into on squash is squash vine borer. Squash vine borer is actually a larval stage of a clear-winged day-flying moth. It looks like a wasp, but it's actually a moth. And so BT will work on it, but the problem is you got to get the BT on the little worm before the worm gets into the vine. Once it's in the vine, it's protected. And that means spraying the vine. You don't need to spray the leaves or anything else. Spraying the vine about every 2 or 3 days from the time the squash begins to bloom until you're tired of eating squash. Because then once you stop, then the vine borers are going to move in. I took this picture at the extension office in Conroe. That is a female squash vine borer adult. And I know she was a female because I watched her fly around the garden and lay her eggs on the vine all over the place. And she would go find the vine and she would stick her little back end up and bump, and you look on there, be a little bitty shiny egg on that vine. So they can be a big problem, and they're day flying, so they're out actually working in the daytime. And generally don't show up until you start getting flowers showing up in the garden. Vine borer is a big problem. BT is probably the best control. We tried some different types of mulches, not specifically for vine borer, but we found that a foil or mylar reflective mulch seemed to have less vine borer damage than the other mulches we used. We used black plastic, red plastic, blue plastic, brown paper, foil backed paper with the foil side up. This bright mylar mulch, real reflective mylar mulch. And the mylar and the foil seemed to do better as far as vine borer was concerned. That wasn't what we were looking into, but that's how it worked out. The reflective mulches, the plants also grew a lot faster and bigger and healthier. And that could be why maybe they had less vine borer damage. You also get a little stink bug called a squash bug. It's a little gray squash bug, and it's a big problem late in the season. Usually when you get a population like this where the fruit are just covered in it, it's not worth doing anything. Just jerk the plants and start over. But you can use, if you catch it early, one of those pyrethrin type products that's in that list from the tomatoes. Bifenthrin, cyfluorethrin, permethrin, or if you're organic you can go with the naturally occurring pyrethrum and use one of those to control it. It requires spraying every 2 or 3 days repeatedly until you get the problem under control. But once you get numbers like this, you just give it up. You can't control that. And the reason you get numbers like that is each one of these little silver discs is a cluster of eggs. And when that cluster hatches out, you get all these little babies, and then they go out and it goes from there. So they can be a big problem. Okra is a great one for us. I will tell you that okra is one of the few vegetables that we will say you do better in a heavy black soil than you do in a light sandy soil. It just does better in those heavy gumbo type soils. You can grow it in the sands, but I would add lots of organic matter And if you have nematodes, which you hope you don't, it may make it impossible to really do a good job with okra. Okra is in the cotton family. It's related to cotton. It's also related to hibiscus. And we generally don't plant the seed until it gets pretty warm. So you don't want to get in a big hurry with okra. I generally suggest you not plant it until at least the first or middle part of April. There are a lot of different varieties out there. This is actually a variety called Cajun Delight, which was one of the first hybrid okras. One that I like is Louisiana Green Velvet or Emerald. That's the round type okra. It's not the angular. See how this one is angular, has the ridges on it? Well, Green Velvet and Emerald are round pod type okra. I think you can let them get a little bigger before you have to cut them and they're still tender. The ribbed type like this, they tend to get high fiber quicker. If you are concerned about space, you might want to get one of the dwarf okras, like Baby Bubba or LA Park Space Saver or Dwarf Long Green Pod. They're more compact. And of those, Baby Bubba is really compact. And I have grown it in pots, and it does really well in pots. I take a 24-inch pot, and I'll put 6 or 8 seeds in it, and it's like this huge hibiscus bush that you can harvest okra off of. It works really well. This is Baby Bubba. It was developed in southern Louisiana, and you can see how dwarf the plants are. They're hard to pick almost because they're so compact, and that's what the pods look like. I just love the name. I think that's a great name for an okra, don't you, Baby Bubba? One of the big problems we run into with okra is nematodes. Nematodes are microscopic roundworms. They attack the roots of the plants, cause these nodules. Not all nematodes make nodules, but some of them do. The root knot nematode makes nodules. There are also spiral nematodes and lance nematodes that don't make nodules. They clog up the root system. The root system doesn't work as well. The plant looks like it's wilting. The edges of the leaves turn brown. The plant begins to defoliate. Just doesn't perform as well if you have nematodes. Nematodes are hard to get rid of. There are really no good chemical controls. Even though there are several companies that sell nematicides to kill nematodes, they really have not proven to be very effective. Solarization in the summertime. Take those beds where you have nematode problems, water them really well, till them up, cover them with clear plastic. Clear plastic works better than black plastic. Let them sit out there for 6 or 8 weeks. Take the plastic off, till them again. Now you're ready to plant your fall garden. The other thing you can do is plant what's called Elbon cereal rye. Now you go to the feed store and you ask them for ryegrass, they're probably going to sell you either perennial rye or annual rye. That's not the same thing as cereal rye. Cereal rye is the one that they grow for grain, that they make rye bread out of and rye whiskey out of. And so you want to be sure you get Elbon cereal rye. You plant the entire bed in October that has the problems with the nematodes to the cereal rye. Let it grow for 6 or 8 weeks. Plow it under, let it rot, plow it under, you're ready to plant it. They don't know why the cereal rye works. They don't know whether it gets trapped in the roots or whether it starves to death or whether the rye releases some kind of chemical when it decomposes. They don't know why it works, but it does seem to work. And it also adds green material to your garden, which helps improve the organic matter in your garden. So anyway, that's the way you might want to go. Okay. Y'all have any questions about any of the warm season vegetables? Any vegetables that you want me to talk about that warm season, the ones that like the heat, that I've not talked about? Do you even know which ones those are?
Well, I do have a question.
Okay, yes ma'am.
I'm growing pumpkins.
Okay.
Okay, I have quite a few.
Mm-hmm.
I actually went out there and counted them because I don't want my animals to follow me out there and pee on
And find them.
Right. So I've read if you want to make the pumpkins bigger that you need to cut off the fuzzy ends. Is that correct? The fuzzy end of the
Of
Or the
vine.
of the
the vine. Well, what that'll do is that'll limit the number of pumpkins that particular plant produces. So it'll put all of its energy into the one that you have out there. So yes, that might help some. Yeah. Picking off the female flowers to prevent the additional pumpkins from forming would do the same thing too. The pumpkins are hard for us, and the fact that you have pumpkins is really good. The other thing I would suggest to you is maybe get a board, a little piece of board or a little shingle, and put it out in there where the pumpkin is and set the pumpkin up on it, because that'll keep it out of the wet soil. You won't get that rotten spot on the bottom of the pumpkin sometimes if you'll do that, and that'll help too.
Okay, I grew some that I've done, let them grow up the fence, and I put the pantyhose.
Mm-hmm.
That was like an experiment.
Sure.
And I harvested them, and so these other ones, I just planted them out where there's some trees, and I just walked away and let them go. I mean,
Well, one of the reasons that pumpkins, a lot of times they'll plant pumpkins in cornfields, because number one, they want to plant the pumpkins later. So they usually wait till after they've harvested the corn. But then the cover of the corn stalks helps to shade the plants a little bit, so you don't get the sunburn on the pumpkins and things like that. So they seem to benefit by having just a little bit of shade out there. So the fact that you're planting it under a tree, as long as it's getting enough light so that it can do what it needs to do, then that's probably helping to shade the fruit and keep them in better shape. We generally plant pumpkins here a little bit later than people realize, and I would say probably June is when you would generally want to plant them in order to have pumpkins for Halloween and Thanksgiving and stuff like that. You plant them too early, the fruit are going to mature and then they're going to rot before it gets the right time. Yeah, exactly. But that's cool that you got that going.
Yeah, they're doing pretty good so far.
All right. The only other one, there's two others that some people sometimes ask about, and I'll mention. I don't have pictures of them. One is sweet potatoes.
Oh, yeah, good.
And I would tell you that you all are in a pretty good shape for sweet potatoes. Y'all probably get weevil here, don't you? So there's, I think you're a little too far south to be in the weevil-free zone. There's a little insect called a sweet potato weevil that, when you harvest your sweet potatoes, there'll be little white worms in your sweet potatoes or little tunnels where the sweet potato weevil larvae has been digging around. And so there's probably not any commercial sweet potatoes around here. You have to get up into northeast Texas before you get into really commercial sweet potato growing areas. It needs to be a light sandy soil for best results, and you got to be in a weevil-free area to really grow them commercially. But you all could grow them for your own use, and the fact if you get weevils in there, then you just got a little extra protein with your sweet potato. But you would want to purchase your slips, the little shoots, from a reputable source, usually in May or June. And if you're going to try to grow your own slips from a sweet potato you bought at the store, then what you do is you can do it just like people do, where they stick some toothpicks in it and stick it in a jar of water and let the vine grow. And then when the vine grows, cut the vine into pieces about this long with 2 or 3 leaves on each piece, and stick them into a good potting soil. Cover it with a plastic bag, and in 3 to 4 weeks it'll have roots on it. Sweet potato roots really, really easily. Then you can take those rooted slips, those are the slips, and you can go out and plant those in your garden. But realize that's going to take you a month, 6 weeks. So you probably want to start working on getting the vine going in April, March or April. Get your slips planted. You want to plant them probably around 6+ feet apart. They get huge, really large. There is a variety from southern Louisiana called Beauregard. And Beauregard is a reddish colored sweet potato, but one of the advantages to it is that the vines are semi-dwarf. It doesn't get as big. So those can be planted about 4 feet apart. The vine will start developing, and when it gets ready to start to run, you'll be able to tell. You want to fertilize it, and you want to bank soil up around the crown. The weevil gets into the roots by landing on the plant and crawling down through cracks and openings in the soil to get down to the roots to lay their eggs on the roots. By banking soil up over the crown, you can help reduce the number of weevils that will get access to your root, the roots that you have. The crop is going to continue to grow all summer long, and you'll go into the fall. Well, now you're ready to make some sweet potato, cook sweet potatoes or bake a sweet potato or whatever. Now you got to figure out when do you harvest them. So, you know, probably sometime in late September, early October, you go out there and dig around one of the plants and find one of the roots. Just pull the root loose, bring it in the house, take it, snap it in half, and just set it on the kitchen counter. Let it sit there for 4 or 5 hours. If you come back and that snapped off piece is still perfectly orange, just like it was when you popped it, snapped it, you're ready to go out and start harvesting. If it's turned black, then those have not cured enough and they need to be left in the ground until they're cured enough. So give them another couple, 3 weeks and go out there and dig another one up and try it again. And you just keep doing that until when you dig it up and you snap it in half, it stays nice and pretty orange. Commercially, they don't worry about that. They dig them when they need to dig them, when they're the size they want to dig them, and then they put them in these great big air dryers and they air dry them. And that's what cures them so that when they ship them out, they're in good shape for you all. But most of us don't have a big old air dryer at our house that we can do that with. I'm not sure you could do it with a hair dryer. It might take too long. So that's how we do sweet potatoes. And the other one that people ask about sometimes is artichokes. And I'm talking about the big Italian globe artichoke. And if you're going to try to grow that, plant it in a sunny, protected area, like on the south side of the house, right now. Grow it through the winter. You may have to cover it a few nights because y'all are cold enough that you may lose it. And it'll make this, plant it away from the house enough because the plants will get 5-6 feet in diameter. Plants are huge. Great big leaves, they're beautiful plants. And then in the late spring, early summer, it'll start sending up these big stalks. Stalks may be, 2 inches in diameter, and they'll have these globe artichokes, which are the flower buds on the top. If you leave it out there, they actually will open into these great big thistle flowers that'll be 6-8 inches across, pink, bright pink. And the butterflies and the hummers just absolutely love them. But if you're going to use them for artichokes, you want to pick them when the buds are fairly small and cut them at that point. Average plants, we were doing this in Houston, which is a little milder than here, and we were averaging anywhere from 12 to 25 buds per plant. So most people, that's more artichokes than most people are going to use. Okay, so that's another one that people always ask about, but you need to get started on that pretty quickly. Okay, the reason that I took a little break right here to get to see what y'all, if you have some other questions, is because we're now into cool season vegetables. This particular part of the program takes about 30 to 40 minutes to complete. So I know when I get here, I got about 30 minutes left or a little bit more, depending on how many questions y'all ask and how much rambling I do. But this is cool season vegetables. This is what you guys are right in the middle of right now. I would have planted my broccoli plants already like last week if I had known, if I could have found a good source down there to plant them, and I will be planting them this week, come hell or high water. Here's the thing about cool season vegetables. For the most part, with very few exceptions, the things that we grow in the wintertime are leafy vegetables. These are vegetables. There are a few root crops in there, but for the most part, they're leafy vegetables. And as a result, they need nitrogen. The faster you can grow them, the faster they finish, the higher the quality, the more tender they're going to be. So you want to move them quickly. And you want to primarily concentrate on using the first number, nitrogen. So the first number on the fertilizer analysis. So you want to use fertilizers that are pretty high in nitrogen on this whole group of plants. Chances are your soils have plenty of phosphorus and plenty of potassium from what you did in the spring. All you got to do is supplement the nitrogen and they should do great. So we're going to give them light shots of nitrogen about every 3 to 4 weeks to keep them moving. The other thing is when you're selecting varieties, try to get the fastest maturing varieties that you can. So if you go in there and they've got 2 trays of broccoli plants, and they got one that's a 65-day variety and one that's an 85-day variety, There is no question which one I'm going to buy. I'm going to buy the 65-day variety. You want the faster maturing plants. And then you want to try to get plants that are young and tender. You don't want those great big old haggard plants that have leaves turning yellow on them, the stems starting to get woody. The reason is if you buy a $65 plant, I mean a 65-day plant, if you buy a 65-day plant and they seeded it 2 weeks ago, that's 14 days, you got 50 days to grow that plant and it's going to produce. But if it's been in that 6-pack for 30 days, then you only got 35 days to grow that plant. And if it's been in that 6-pack for 45 days, you only got 20 days from the time you get home with it to grow that plant. So you want to get the young juvenile plants so that they have plenty of time to mature and produce what they're going to produce. You don't want those old beat up plants. If you can get a plant in and get it to grow and produce some size to it, a broccoli plant that's like this will produce a head that's 6-8 inches across. A broccoli plant that's like this will produce a little bitty head like this. So the faster you can grow them, the better they'll be, better quality, better maturity, all that kind of stuff. So I'm not going to repeat that a whole bunch of times. That's true of all this stuff we're about to talk about. Heavy feeders use frequent small applications of high nitrogen fertilizers. Okay, we just did that. Okay. So the first group we're going to talk about is the crucifer family or cabbage family, or somebody might call them cole crops. And it's not cold crops, it's cole crops, like coleslaw. But anyway, we're talking about cabbage, broccoli, cauliflower, Brussels sprouts, turnips, kale, kohlrabi, radishes, collards, mustard. I think there's more here. And Chinese cabbage. These are all crucifers. These are all in the cabbage family. Take care of them all the same way. Grow the ones that you like to grow, the ones that you like to eat. Pretty much culture is very, very similar. We generally are going to transplant cabbage, broccoli, cauliflower, Brussels sprouts. All the rest of them can be planted from seed.
Is it
So
too
if
late?
you're planting, oh no, we're right in the midst of it right now.
Right.
Yeah, this is it. You got it right ahead of you. And almost all of these, with the exception of turnips and mustard, will tolerate pretty much whatever winter you guys get. Turnips and mustard are going to freeze if you get a really hard killer freeze. The rest of them are pretty. Chinese cabbage might get damaged occasionally if it's really cold, but collards will take 5-6 degrees, no problem at all.
Oh, wow.
The same thing's true of radishes may get damaged with 5 or 6 degrees, but all the rest of them, all winter long, they'll grow all winter long with no difficulty at all. But grow the ones that you like to eat. We don't like to eat cabbage. We don't eat a lot of cabbage. We don't grow cabbage. One cabbage plant takes up a 2-foot by 2-foot square area in your garden. That's a lot of space. And it'll take it up for 100 days. So it's tying it up for a long, long time. So we don't grow cabbage. We primarily grow broccoli, cauliflower, Brussels sprouts out of this group. Those are the main ones we grow. My wife loves Brussels sprouts. She doesn't have to fight anybody in the house for them. She gets all of them she wants, but she loves Brussels sprouts. I don't grow cauliflower a lot because we don't eat a lot of cauliflower. We grow a lot of broccoli. That's one that we grow a lot of because we like it. Now, what about this one right here? That's the star, right? That's going to save all of us, right? All of these have the same goodie in them. May not have the percentages exactly the same, but if you like broccoli and you absolutely loathe that nasty green shake they're making you drink every morning, eat broccoli. You're going to get the same goodie out of it. Don't feel like you got, just because kale's got a good press agent, don't feel like you got to eat that nasty kale when there's all these other things that you can choose from. So I always think that's interesting because people think they got to eat kale, but there's lots of other stuff they can do. Cabbage takes up a lot of space. It's really one we would plant. I would suggest planting all the cabbage you plan to plant at one time because you just leave whatever you're not going to use out in the garden and it just stays out there. It'll stay out there till probably May before it bolts to seed. When the head cracks open and it bolts to seed, then it's ruined. But up until then, you can just keep harvesting it. So you figure from now until May, you're going to eat 17 heads of cabbage. I can't even imagine that. Plant 25 plants. And out of that, you'll have enough to where you can share some with a neighbor and that sort of thing. Flowering cabbage, flowering kale are absolutely edible, without question. They're going to be more like eating kale than they're going to be like eating cabbage because they're mostly leafy. But flowering cabbage and kale are absolutely edible. The horticulturist in San Antonio, his name was Jerry Parsons. He's retired now. Wrote an article in the San Antonio paper when the Parks Department planted the whole Riverwalk in flowering kale and cabbage about how good it was to eat. And within a week, there was no cabbage or kale on the Riverwalk. It had all been eaten. His name was Mud, needless to say. Every year, I had an opportunity years ago to go to Alaska and go to the state fair. And one of the things they have at the state fair is in the Matanuska Valley, north of Anchorage, is they have a big cabbage contest. And they literally have to bring the cabbages in on forklifts because they are so big. We have these 80, 90-pound cabbages. Now this is the same kind of variety. This is a variety called Mammoth, which was actually grown in Houston. Now, this was grown in Houston. You know, everything's bigger in Texas, right? This was about a 12 to 15-pound cabbage. Now, if you took that same cabbage and you planted it in Alaska, it would be 85 pounds. Now, why is that different? What's the difference?
Water content, maybe?
What's that?
The water, maybe?
No.
Temperature.
Temperature, somewhat.
Sunlight. They have a whole lot more sunlight at a certain time of year than they do at different
yeah.
times.
They grow cabbage in their area in the summertime. We grow cabbage here in the wintertime. Their days are 22, 23 hours long every day. Ours are 8, 7.
Yeah.
That's the difference between them. But we can grow those great big varieties, just they're not going to get as big for us. I like broccoli and that's the one I grow a lot. We grow a lot of. We like broccoli, but I also like the fact that it's relatively easy to grow. In a 24-inch pot, I can usually plant 3 or 4 plants, and the heads will get 5, 6 inches across. But the thing that I like about broccoli is you cut that center head out, and then you get the production of all the side shoots, and it'll continue to produce side shoots for several weeks after you've cut the center head out. Ultimately, you need to pull the plant and either plant again or have some more ready to start coming off, that sort of thing. Again, like I said, every 3 to 4, like all this stuff, every 3 to 4 weeks you want to give them a shot of nitrogen. Keep them going, keep them growing, and you'll get good production out of them. Take 6, 7 degrees, no problem. And it'll take your winters with no difficulty at all. Biggest problem with cauliflower as far as y'all's winter is concerned is if that head is starting to form and the weatherman is predicting a hard freeze, you probably should go cut the head out because it's probably going to damage the head. The plant is absolutely hardy. So if you look down into the leaves and there's no head forming and it's going to be 17 degrees out tonight, don't worry about it. The plant will be fine. But if that little head is starting to form, you better cut the head and take it. If it's going to hit 28, 20, even 27, probably not going to hurt the head at all. But you get a hard freeze and it's going to hurt it. Now, one of the things that we do, people want their cauliflower to be just white, just bright white. I'll be honest with you, it doesn't make a bit of difference. If it's got a little purpling in it or a little green or yellow in it, it eats just fine. It doesn't create any problem at all. But people want their cauliflower to be perfectly white. So when the head starts to form, if you'll pull those outer wrapper leaves up and tie them with a rubber band or string, they call that blanching. And that'll keep the head perfectly white. I don't do that, but my heads don't look like that. Now another thing you could do is you could grow one of the colored cauliflowers. There are purple cauliflowers. This is a variety called Violet Queen. There's also another one called Confetti that it almost looks like it's iridescent. It almost looks like it would glow in the dark. It's such a bright purple. Now when these are cooked, the purple ones are cooked, they turn chartreusey colored. They don't keep their purple color when they're cooked. The pigment is temperature sensitive. So if you want to serve it as a purple vegetable, you have to serve it raw in order for it to stay purple. And then you've got the ones they call broccaflower, which are really cauliflowers. And they're sort of chartreusey colored, and they will stay that chartreusey colored when you cook them. They don't have to be blanched because you want the sunlight to hit them to enhance the color. This is the one that gets me. Now, when I was growing up, the only way that Mom could get us to eat cauliflower was to put cheese sauce all over it, right? Okay, well, they came up with this variety. They named it cheddar. And the whole idea with the variety cheddar was because it's already yellow, they could prepare it and serve it, and nobody would know that it didn't have cheese sauce all over it. And so they'd eat it anyway. Now, I don't know how stupid your children and grandchildren are, but mine are going to know there's no cheese on that. So I'm still going to have to put the cheese on it. But that was the idea. They also, y'all probably have had Yukon Gold potatoes. Well, the reason they developed Yukon Gold, well, not the reason, but one of the things that they promoted about it was because it was golden already, you didn't have to use as much butter on it because it's going to have that golden color already. So this is one of my wife's favorites, is Brussels sprouts, and so we grow this one as well. Brussels sprouts take a long time. Plant them all at once because once they start producing, they're gonna produce for a long period of time. Don't have to stagger the planting like you might do with broccoli or even cauliflower. So plant all the plants. They're going to develop a stalk on them. I would suggest one of the newer varieties, the ones that I would suggest to you, and I don't know what's on your list, but I would suggest a variety called Oliver or Diablo, a variety called Bubbles, or Tasty Nugget. Those four would be the ones I'd suggest to you. And I looked online this morning, and Diablo, Tasty Nugget, and Bubbles are all still available. I couldn't find a source on Oliver.
See him?
Hmm?
I just, being blind, I couldn't see him.
They're
Oh,
under.
yeah, okay, there we go.
They only have two. I only have two of them on my list: Tasty Nugget and Diablo. But Bubbles is another one that's good. What I suggest people do is plant them all at one time. When the stalks get up about a foot to 18 inches, cut the top out of half of them. I usually skip a plant, cut the top out of this one, skip a plant, cut the top out of this one. Now, what happens to a branch when you cut the tip out of it?
It gets all the lateral.
That's right, all the lateral buds release. So that causes the buds to start to develop on those quicker than the ones that you didn't top. So you harvest those and continue harvesting those till you've taken all the Brussels sprouts off. And then when you get done, you pull those plants out. Because you did every other one, that gives you more room for the plants that remain. And then later, sometimes months later, those will start to develop and you can start harvesting those. And that way you can get production a little quicker and stretch the production out over a longer period of time. Okay, what do we got now? Collard, kale, and kohlrabi. They can all be planted from transplants, but they do so easily from seed. Just lightly broadcast the seed on the surface, water them, and the plants will come up, and you can plant them right now. Collard is the poor man's kale. That's what the South grew. Kale was more of a northern vegetable. They all do great here, and I'd encourage you, if you like collards or kale, you plant them right now because they really will do great here. Now, kohlrabi, you actually are eating this in large stem. This is not a root like a turnip. It's actually in a large stem, and that's what you eat. But the entire plant's edible. You can eat all the leaves and everything, so you don't have to throw all the leaves away just because they say you're supposed to eat that enlarged stem. And in actuality, you can eat the leaves of broccoli and you can eat the leaves of cauliflower, and the whole plant's edible on all of these. The kohlrabi comes in purple or green. And in our children's garden, where they grow vegetables, we would always plant kohlrabi because it did better than celery. And it would give the kids an example of a vegetable that you would grow for the stem instead of a vegetable you grow for the flowers or the leaves or the fruit. And so we would grow it. Turnips, real popular vegetable in the South. One of the things about turnips is it makes pretty quick. You can get turnips to make in 45 to 65 days, especially if you're growing them for tops. Most people keep their turnips in the ground too long. They're really better if they're picked when the root is relatively immature. And if you're going to be growing turnips for the root, then I would suggest planting a little bit, wait a few weeks, plant a little more, wait a few weeks, plant a few more. If you're growing them for the leaves, strictly to harvest the leaves, then just plant everything you plan to plant. And if we're going to get a hard freeze, go out there and harvest all the leaves you can, let them freeze to the ground, clean the bed up, plant some more. You probably have time to make another crop on them before we get another hard freeze that kills the plants, because they make so quick. Turnips and mustard actually was the #1 cash crop for those German and Czech farmers down in North Houston. They made more money on turnips and mustard every year than any other vegetable that they grew, and it was because they could get so many crops in during the winter months. Plant multiple times. There's mustard. And again, scatter the seed, lightly water them, and you're in business in 6 weeks. Radishes are one that people have trouble with. And I think the main reason is because they don't thin them quickly enough. They plant too many seed and they don't thin them quickly enough. Radishes make in about 35 days. So if you don't thin them until they're 2-3 weeks old, you waited too long to thin them. So once the seedlings are up, probably at day 5 or so, you need to thin them out so they're about 2 inches apart to give them the room that they need for that root to develop. And then you want to pick them when they're at their peak. If you leave them in until the roots get big and crack, they tend to be very strongly flavored. They'll even hot. So they're best when they're picked when they're relatively immature. I like the long, this is one called French breakfast radish. It's a icicle type radish, but it has a red top on it. But there's lots of them out there, lots and lots of different kind of radishes. And then you've got the Asian radishes like the daikons. And they get huge. Now they don't produce fast like the small radishes do. These can take 85, 100 days to produce. Depending on which culture you are in, you may eat different kinds of daikons. There are round ones, there are long ones. Some of them have a black skin on them, some of them have a white skin on them. A lot of different kinds of daikons out there. Some are very spicy and hot, some are very mild and bland. Just depends on what culture you're in and what you use them for. We grew these just for the experience of growing them. I'll be honest with you, daikons are not a part of my diet, but they are simple to grow, and it's one that if you have ever used them or want to try them, they certainly would be something that you could grow without any difficulty at all. This is the one that surprises everybody, and this is lettuce. Lettuce will take a ton of cold. Not a little bit of cold. They'll take a ton of cold. They will take 6 or 7 degrees with no difficulty at all. And people think because it's this little frail, fragile looking plant that it can't take the cold, but it can. Lettuce can take a lot of cold. This happens to be an heirloom variety. It's called deer tongue. It's one of the early precursors to the bib type lettuces. It has kind of a waxy, buttery sort of a consistency to it. There are literally hundreds and hundreds of different varieties of lettuces out there. Stay away from any of the iceberg type lettuces. They hate us. They don't perform well here at all. I personally grow the romaines at my house because I like the crisp white core that comes with an iceberg. And I don't get that with a lot of the leaf lettuces, but you can get that in a romaine. But the bib types do great here, the oak leaves, and I like oak leaves as well. This is one of my favorite oak leaves. This is an heirloom from back in the 70s called Salad Bowl. It's still a good variety. And it's what they call an oak leaf lettuce. One of the more recent varieties, French varieties, this is a variety called Brunia. It's a red oak leaf type lettuce. So you got lots and lots and lots of different lettuces that you can pick from. The seed absolutely have to have light to germinate. If you plant the seed too deep, when you till your garden next spring, you'll get lettuce coming up in the garden because you'll bring the seed up to the surface where they can get light. So you want to plant the seed right on the surface, or start them in cups and transplant them. They work fine transplanted. I prefer to plant them in place, but they will work fine transplanted. Seeds need light to germinate. One other thing about lettuce is that it contains a alkaloid. If you've ever cut fresh lettuce, you've seen this white milky substance that leaks out of the lettuce. That's the alkaloid, and it makes the lettuce bitter.
Okay.
If you refrigerate your lettuce for 2 or 3 days before you serve it, all the bitterness goes away. You've never bought lettuce at the grocery store that was bitter because you've never bought lettuce that was picked that day and served to you that day. It's all been stored for a few days, and the bitterness has had a chance to go away. I was in the valley when I was a graduate student, and we had an opportunity to go out to one of the big lettuce fields there in the valley, and the farm manager went out there and cut some heads of lettuce and brought it over, and we got a chance to taste it. And this is the stuff that's in the grocery stores. Every single bite was so bitter I could hardly eat it. But once it gets to the grocery store, it's going to be fine. It's going to be gone. So keep that in mind with lettuce. I don't grow carrots anymore. I grew these carrots, but I don't grow carrots anymore because I don't know if you all have seen it, but they have these cellophane packages at the grocery store. It has all these little carrots, and they've already been peeled and washed, and they're good. So I don't grow carrots. But you can certainly grow carrots. I'd suggest planting them in October. They need light to germinate. Make sure they get plenty of room because they need to be 2 inches apart after they germinate. And plant the short varieties. Don't plant a 16-inch Imperator type carrot. We don't have the soil conditions for them. You want the Champney, Nance, Danver, the short type carrots in order for us to do well with them. And that's what's in this picture. There's probably 20 different varieties of carrots in this pile. Some of them were exceptional and some of them were okay. One of the biggest problems with carrots is that if they go into stress, they tend to develop high levels of a chemical called terpene. Now, can you imagine what terpene might taste like?
Turpentine.
Exactly. So if you've ever eaten a carrot and it had sort of a hot, sort of a piney taste to it, that's high terpene, and that's from stress. Now, my major professor when I was at A&M was a plant breeder, and he bred vegetables. He was the one who originated the maroon carrot, the Aggie maroon carrot, and the Y1015 onion. Those are his two most famous. Although he originated a number of other things as well. But he went to Russia looking for genetics for carrots to get rid of terpene. He had a grant from Gerber to try to breed terpene out of carrots because apparently babies are especially sensitive to the taste of terpene, and they won't eat carrots that have a high level of terpene in them. And that's where he found the genetics that he used to develop the Aggie maroon carrot that he was famous. One of the things that he was famous for.
Who was he?
His name was Dr. Leonard Pike. Yeah, he's gone now. He's passed away. But he was a good plant breeder. Anyway, these are carrots, and like I said, you got to give them plenty of room, give them lots of space, and light to germinate. Regular light doses of nitrogen fertilizer. Keep them out of stress. Onions, we do great with onions. I personally feel a lot of people like to plant their onions in the fall and grow it through the winter months and then harvest in the spring, early summer. I prefer to buy transplants, buy those bundles of transplants at the feed stores, and plant my onions right after the 1st of January. So sometime during the first month, during the month of January. I find that I have an easier time getting them to produce and get size to them than I do planting seed in the fall. Now if you plant the transplants in the fall, which sometimes you can find them available in the fall, and you plant the transplants, they're going to get too big. The plants are going to get too big before we get into winter. and they're going to get what they call vernalized. They're going to get a cold treatment. Onions are biennials. They produce a plant the first year and a flower stalk the second year. Well, if you get them too big before the cold comes, then they think that they've grown and are now going through a winter, and then when spring comes, they pop up a flower stalk, and that ruins the onions. They call that bolting. So I prefer to plant the transplants after the first year rather than going with transplants in the fall. If you want to plant them in the fall, then I would suggest planting seed in the fall. And as far as when you plant the seed, I would say sometime in very early November. Now I know the Y1015 is supposed to be planted on the 15th day of October. That's what all the promotion publicity is about, right? Oh, I got to grow the Y1015 and I got to plant it on October 15th. The only time that that really is applicable is if you live in Weslaco, Texas. Dr. Pike named that, along with about 6 other onions, with planting dates to help the growers in the valley know when to plant those 6 different onions. And the Y1015 was the only one that really ever caught on. And word got out that, oh, you plant them on October 15th, which is true if you live in Weslaco, Texas. It's really a little early for us up here to plant them, and it would be better to wait till the early part of November for us to plant the Y1015. So you can still plant it 15th of October, but it would just be better if you waited a little longer. We can also grow leeks. We can grow garlic. Actually, if you want to try garlic, you need to plant it pretty soon. Go to the grocery store, buy a white garlic or that red Mexican garlic, break it up into individual cloves, plant it about 6 inches apart, lightly fertilize it every 4 to 6 weeks. Leave it in until the neck dries up and the tops fall over, which is going to be July. So you're planting it now, you're going to have to put it somewhere in the garden where you can leave it till July, and then you pull it up and you've got your cloves that you can use. If at any time during the year you want to use garlic, just go out there with a pair of scissors and cut the plants back, chop up all that green stuff, put it in whatever you're cooking, and it'll give it that garlic flavor as well. The entire plant of garlic is edible. Shallots. Shallots are just multiplying onions. And the best way to get shallots is to find somebody who has shallots and share them, get them to share them with you. They're really easy to grow. Plant them this time of year. They'll go down and go dormant in the summer next year, and then you dig up the clump and divide it and share them with your neighbors and start the thing all over again. We have chives on the back porch. I've had the same pot of chives on the back porch. It looks pretty ragged right now, but it's just now going into its season. It performs best in the wintertime. But we have chives that we can cut anytime we want, pretty much all year round, out of this big pot on the patio in the back. And I like, that's I think where they're best is in a big container. I just buy a little pot of chives and put them in a big container. Onions, plant seed in November, plant plants in January. They're going to produce milder onions in low sulfur soils. So if you want real sweet, the reason the Vidalia, Georgia onions are so sweet is because their soils have very little sulfur in them. And the way they keep that is they avoid using fertilizers that have sulfur in them. Most fertilizers have sulfur in them. So what they primarily use is urea. Urea is a high nitrogen fertilizer, and that's what they primarily use, but it has no sulfur in it. Fertilize with small amounts of fertilizer frequently. Every 3-4 weeks you give them a little shot of fertilizer. Onions have a very small root system, so you got to fertilize fairly close to the plants in order for them to utilize it. There are some old wives' tales about onions, and I'll relay the three. There's 3 of them. Number one is that in order for onions to bulb, in order for them to produce their bulb, you have to pull the soil away from them. And another one is in order for onions to bulb, you have to bank the soil up against them. And another one is, in order for them to bulb, you have to break the neck over. Break the neck over. All of those are false. If the onion develops in the ground, your soils are very soft and easy to work. If the onion develops above the ground, it's because your soils tend to crust and are a little compacted. If you break the neck over, you stop the flow of nutrients in the leaves to the root and the plant stops developing. Onions, the neck will soften when the onion is ready to go dormant, which is usually June or July. The neck will soften and the onion top will fall over. So people get the impression, well, the neck is broken over and the onion is ready, so then if I break the neck over, it'll make the onion ready, and that's not true. Onions can be used at any time during the growing season, so if you need onion, go out and pull an onion or two. Even when the roots are not ready, but that's when you're getting ready to use it, and leave the rest of them out there because they'll keep out there until late spring, early summer when they go dormant. When they go dormant, you dig all the rest of them, clean them up, bring them in the house, put them in a cool, dark place to store them, and until you use them up. I will tell you, check them frequently. There is nothing worse than a rotten onion, except maybe a rotten potato. Garlic, October, 4 to 6 inches apart. Here are the plants growing. Anytime, go out there and chop leaves off, chop them up. You can use them to season with, just like you would the garlic. Usually takes a little more of the green to get the same seasoning effect because it's not as strong as the clove. This is at a fresh market, at a farmer's market in New Orleans, and these were garlic plants that were bundled and for sale, and the chefs would come in and get these stalks and they would just literally chop them from one end to the other, and they'd use all of it. They'd just throw it in whatever they were cooking. So the whole plant is edible, and these, they haven't even started to form cloves yet. They're just, this one just beginning to get some cloves in it. This is the last group we've got, and then I've got a couple of beneficials I'm going to show you. This is the goosefoot family. And beets are a challenge. I'll be perfectly honest with you. They are challenging to grow. I would suggest that you get as much organic matter in your soil as you possibly can. Make sure that you space them out adequately. They will not beat. They will not form that beet very well if they're too close together. So make sure they're 3 to 4 inches minimum apart. The tops are edible, just like the root is. I will tell you that with all these greens, if you have, if you're on blood thinners or have to take blood thinners, check with your doctor before you eat too many greens. Because, and I'm not a doctor, so I'm not giving you medical advice. I'm just telling you, before you eat a whole bunch of green leafy vegetables, make sure you check with your doctor first, because it can aggravate people's problems that they have when they're on blood thinners. And it has vitamin K in it and some other things that can cause problems. And beet tops are notorious for that. So, but beet tops are edible. A bunch of different varieties out there. Detroit red, dark red is probably the one that's been around the longest. But I'll be honest with you, some of the newer ones are much easier to grow and much more reliable for us, because beets are a bit of a challenge. Now you can grow the beetless beet, the one that doesn't form a root, and that's Swiss chard, and it's much easier for us to grow. The greens are very similar to beet tops. It's one of the few greens that will go all summer. So if you like to eat greens in the middle of the summer, and you've had trouble getting your collards and your mustard and your kale to go through the summer, try chard. Chard will usually go through the summer better than the other greens do. It's still best in the wintertime, and it's now is the time to plant it, but they quite often will go all summer without becoming, you know, horribly strong. Sometimes these greens will last through the summer, but the flavors are so strong that it's hard for people to eat them. This was an All-America selection a number of years ago called Bright Lights, and it was promoted as an ornamental, but it's Swiss chard. And what you can do is plant this as a background plant in your flower beds, and then put pansies or snaps or calendulas in front of it, and then you've got this that you can come in and harvest and make and put in salads or cook as a winter green or whatever. And it's very, very decorative. They get about 2.5 feet tall and lots of different colors. Just a really nice ornamental vegetable.
What was that called again?
Called Bright Lights. Bright Lights. Then one of my favorites, and one that we always plant lots of in the wintertime, even in the pots, is spinach. Now spinach is a little hard to get up. It doesn't germinate easily, so I usually soak the seed overnight before I plant it. which I feel like seems to help. I usually will start the early ones, the ones right now, in cups, which I need to do this weekend, and go out to the garden with them after they've become established, and then I'll plant seed later. Spinach is one of those that you're either going to do great with it or you're going to have a total crop failure. There's no in between. Spinach is best when we have one of those winters where it gets cold and it absolutely stays cold. And it's cold, I mean, it doesn't have to be severe cold, but it doesn't like the roller coaster. You know, we tend to have roller coasters here in the wintertime. You know, 35 degrees, 85 degrees, 27 degrees, 78 degrees, you know, and spinach hates the roller coaster. And so it'll get cold and then it'll get hot for a period of time. It all bolts to seed and then you're finished. You either got to replant or you got to pull it up and replant or give it up. So the years that I've done best on spinach have been those years where winter socked in and it just stayed here. And we didn't get a lot of roller coasters during the winter months. So I always try it, but I don't always have success with it. Okay, let's go through some of these bad guys and good guys. In the winter, you don't. One of the things that's so great about the winter vegetable garden is you don't have a lot of problems. It is so much easier to be an organic gardener in the wintertime than it is to be an organic gardener here in the summertime. The main problem you're going to have is with caterpillars. This happens to be a cabbage looper. How do we kill caterpillars organically?
BT.
Exactly, BT. Not only how do you kill caterpillars chemically? BT. They have used BT for what, probably 40 plus years, and they have never seen resistance build up on it. That is not true of most other insecticides. So BT is what I would suggest to you for caterpillars. Then you're also going to run into aphids sometimes in the wintertime. My best control for aphids, especially in smaller gardens, is hard water spray. Get one of those nozzles that you can put the flat fan on, put it on a flat fan, go out there and just wash the plant down from top to bottom. Tomorrow, go out there and wash them down from top to bottom. Next day, go out there and wash. Usually 3 or 4 times and you're done with the aphids without applying any pesticides or anything like that. And so that's what I suggest. You can use malathion, which is a chemical pesticide, relatively low toxicity. You also can use oil sprays, like horticultural oil, neem oil, sun oil, that sort of thing. Or you can use soaps. Now I will tell you about soaps. Soaps are only good for young, soft-bodied insects. Beetles, hard-shelled insects, and mature insects, like that 5-inch tomato hornworm, you might as well be giving them a bath because the soaps are not going to work. You take a tomato hornworm that's 1/4 to 1/2 of an inch long and you spray it with an insecticidal soap, it's dead. You take a 5-inch long tomato hornworm, mature, you're not going to do a thing to it with the soap sprays. So you've got to catch them early if you're going to have success with the soap sprays. And try one plant in your planting before you spray the whole thing, because soaps can burn stuff. Had really big problems, I think I mentioned it, with peppers and with some of the other vegetables in the vegetable garden with soaps. So be careful with soaps. And I think I have one more. Anybody know what that is?
Mushroom?
Huh?
It looks like a mushroom.
Yeah, it's that's a little hunk of wood or something. Those little hairs with the white eggs on the top are lacewing eggs. Lacewings are good guys. They're beneficials. This is the immature lacewing. Looks like a little alligator. He roams around on the leaves and he eats soft-bodied insects. He uses those great big jaws to hold on to them while he eats them. The adult lacewing is right here. It's a nectar feeder. It feeds on nectar and pollen primarily. So one of the ways to help bring in good guys into your garden is to always make sure you plant a few flowers in and around your garden. Because the nectar feeders, the pollen feeders, will be attracted to the flowers, and they're part of the good guys that help you out with a lot of these problems. Because they may not eat the pollen or nectar when they're in this stage, but they will need it when they're the adults. If you don't bring the adults in, you don't get the eggs, and then you don't get the immatures, which help you out. So it's always good to have. This is a wasp that lays its eggs on the back of the caterpillar. The eggs bore into the caterpillar. I always try to show this one right before lunch. So, it bores into the caterpillar and it eats the whole inside of the caterpillar out. And then when it matures, it forms these little rice-sized cocoons. Those are cocoons all over the back of that caterpillar. The top of the cocoon will pop open, the wasp comes out, and it starts all over on another caterpillar. So you see, that was taken at the extension office there in Conroe a number of years ago. I found that one out there. That guy's not happy. He's not feeling good. You want to leave him there. He's going to help take care of the other problems that are out there. This is a little tracheogramma wasp, and that's an aphid. Gives you an idea how big that wasp is. It's a little bitty wasp. It's not a baby wasp. It's full grown. That's how big they are. But they'll lay their egg on the back of the aphid. They bore into the aphid. They eat the inside of the aphid out. And then they use the exoskeleton of the aphid as the shell of their cocoon when they pupate. Then when they get ready to emerge, they cut a little hole in the back end of the exoskeleton of the aphid, and they come out as a little wasp, and it all starts all over again. So all of this is going on in your garden, and that's one of the reasons that you want to try to kind of, be careful about using pesticides, and make sure the ones you use don't target all of this kind of stuff, and try to do things like plant flowers in and around the garden to bring them in. So anything we can do to encourage helps out. These guys don't help you much, but they're kind of fun to have around. I've had bug boxes with them in them for years with my grandkids when they were little. They're all grown up now. Wouldn't be interested. I may have to wait for the next round. The great grandkids, and then of course lady beetles. I don't know that they help you a great deal, but they're kind of fun to have around, and I certainly wouldn't discourage them being there. But I wouldn't suggest buying lady beetles. Let them show up on their own, because they will. This is actually the guy that helps you with the lady beetles. That's the adult lady beetle, which does eat bugs, but the immature. That's the one. That's the immature lady beetle. That's the one that helps you. And I make the comparison. Think about how much you eat as an adult and how much your teenage son or teenage grandson eats. And that's the difference. This is two whole chickens, and this is a breast or a leg. That's the difference. And those immature ones, they're just eating machines 24/7. They're eating. That's all they do. So you want the immature ones out there. That's it. I really enjoyed coming up to see you guys. And I appreciate the opportunity to come see you. I hope all of y'all have a really safe rest of the winter and don't get any sicknesses or anything.
I have, okay, they're some type of, they look like a little, my husband keeps saying they're millipedes.
They could be millipedes.
They're hard, their shell's
They
hard.
kind of curl up when they get disturbed.
We had like this massive amount, I looked out, they were all over our porch, they were crawling up the side of the house, and I was like, oh my God.
They probably are millipedes.
I checked
Probably
hot soapy water, and they just dropped dead.
Well, that's good. That's
Well,
good.
but that was just weird, but when I went to Palestine yesterday, a lady was telling me that had the same thing happen as them.
Well, see, we've had all this rain, and they've been probably feeding them the organic matter in the flower beds around the house, and then we get a wet period, and they climb up the side of the house to get out of the water, or come up onto the porch to get out of the water, and we get calls about them all the time. I don't know, have you been getting any calls about it?
A few.
Richard?
Yes.
Getting a few? Yeah. 7 works really good on them. I had not tried hot soapy water, but that would certainly be a good approach. Yeah, sure would.
So, I mean, are they always there?
They're always there.
Okay, because I was
And
like,
they chew on old dead plant material, bark in the flower beds, decaying organic matter. They're chewing on all that decaying organic matter. So actually, they're kind of helping you out. They're just part of the cycle of life.
they